From a cosmic creation week to a global flood, from a man who talked with God face to face to a family so dysfunctional it would make a modern reality show blush. This is Genesis, the complete story from creation to Joseph. We're going to connect the dots from the very first let there be light all the way to Joseph's tear-filled reunion with his brothers. Stick with me, and by the end, you'll see how creation, the fall, the covenant with Abraham, and the saga of Joseph are all one seamless narrative. Before we begin, however, for those who are already following, you'll know this is one of the first videos I've uploaded in a long time. The last couple months, I genuinely didn't know whether I'd be able to continue this channel. But looking back now, I think there was something I needed to learn through all of it. Sometimes you make plans for your life, for your work, for the things you want to build, and then God has other plans for you. So I waited, I prayed, and I trusted in the Lord. And now somehow we're here again. I find it fitting that after all of this, the first story we're going to tell begins with the same thing. This is Genesis. In the beginning. Before the first morning, there was no morning at all, no sun to rise, no sky to hold it, no ground to stand on. There was only the deep, a vast and silent darkness, and the breath of God moving over the waters like a whisper searching for a place to rest. This is the story as it has been told, passed down through generations, written in the book of Genesis. It is a sacred account, a tale of faith. It speaks of beginnings in ways that words can hold, ways that point beyond themselves. And then God spoke. Light came first, not the light of the sun, not yet. A different kind of light, soft and pure, spilling into the darkness like water finding its level. God saw the light and knew it was good. He called it day, and the darkness he called night. Evening passed, morning came. That was the first day. Then God spoke again. It'd be a space between the waters, a wide and open expanse. And there it was. God called it sky. The waters below stayed where they were, and the waters above gathered themselves into clouds. Evening passed, morning came. The second day had arrived. On the third day, God gathered the waters below into one place. He called the dry ground land, and the waters he called seas. And God looked at what he had made, and it was good. But the land was bare, so God spoke once more. Let the earth bring forth plants, he said, seeds and trees and every kind of green thing, and the earth obeyed. Grasses pushed through the soil, trees stretched toward the sky. Every plant carried within itself the promise of more life, seeds hidden in fruit and flowers. God saw it all, it was good. Evening passed, morning came. The fourth day brought lights to the sky. God made the sun to rule the day, large and warm and steady. He made the moon to rule the night, smaller and softer, a quiet companion for the darkness. And he set the stars in their places, scattered across the heavens like dust thrown by a generous hand. They were not just for beauty. They were for signs and seasons, for days and years, for marking time as it moved forward. God saw the lights above and knew they were good. Evening passed, morning came. On the fifth day, God turned his attention to the waters and the sky. Let the waters teem with living things, he said. Let the birds fly above the earth, and the seas came alive. Fish of every size and shape, creatures that glided and darted and drifted. The waters swarmed with movement. Above, birds rose on their wings, filling the air with sound and motion. God blessed them. Be fruitful and multiply, he said. Fill the seas, fill the skies, and they did. Evening passed, morning came. The sixth day began with the land. Let the earth bring forth living creatures, God said, and it did. Animals of every kind walked across the ground. Cattle grazed. Creatures small and large moved through the fields and forests. Wild beasts prowled. God saw that it was good. But something was not yet complete. God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every creature that moves on the ground. So God formed man from the dust of the ground. His hands worked the soil like a potter works clay, shaping and smoothing. Then God breathed into the man's nostrils. Not just air, something more. The breath of life itself, the very spirit of God passing into the dust. And the man opened his eyes. He was not like the animals, he was like God. He could think, he could choose, he could love, he could create. He carried within himself a reflection of the divine, a spark that set him apart from everything else that walked or flew or swam. God made man male and female. He blessed them and gave them a task. Be fruitful and multiply, he said. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every living thing that moves on the ground. I have given you every plant that bears seed and every tree with fruit. They will be your food. And to the animals, I give the green plants for their food. God looked at everything he had made, the sky and the sea, the land and the plants, the sun and the moon and the stars, the fish and the birds and the animals, and the man and the woman standing together in the new world. It was very good, more than good, complete, whole, perfect in its beginning. Evening passed, morning came, the sixth day ended, and on the seventh day God rested. He did not rest because he was tired. He rested because the work was finished. There was nothing left to make, nothing left to shape or form or fill. The world stood before him in its fullness, and God stepped back to look at it. He blessed the seventh day. He made it holy, set apart from the others, a day of rest, a day of peace, a day to simply be. That first world was a world of order. Light separated from darkness, water separated from sky, land separated from sea. Everything had its place. Every creature had its purpose. And at the center of it all stood humanity, made in the image of the Creator, given the world as a gift and a trust. The man and the woman did not yet know what lay ahead. They did not know about choices that would come. They did not know about the serpent or the tree or the long road of sorrow that would follow. In that moment, they knew only the goodness of what God had made. They knew the warmth of the sun on their skin. They knew the taste of fruit from the trees. They knew the presence of God walking with them in the cool of the evening. The rhythm of the days was gentle. Work and rest, light and dark, evening and morning. The world moved in cycles, each one a small echo of the first week. The seventh day stood as a reminder that rest was not laziness. Rest was holy. Rest was a gift from the one who had made everything. God had spoken, and the world came to be. He had shaped, and the world took form. He had breathed, and life began. All of it was good. All of it was his. And the man and the woman, the crown of his creation, walked in the garden of the world with nothing to fear and nothing to hide. But the story was just beginning. The world was fresh, and the days stretched out before them like an open road. The Creator had finished his work. The creatures had received their lives, and humanity stood at the threshold of all that would come, holding the image of God like a lamp in the dawn. Seeds waited in the ground. Waters waited in their courses. Stars waited in their positions, and the man and the woman waited too, not knowing what the next chapter would bring. They only knew the goodness of the present moment, the peace of a world without shadow, the quiet joy of walking with their Maker. The first chapter closed with rest. The seventh day settled over creation like a blanket. God had made a home for his people, and he had made them for himself. The heavens declared his glory. The earth showed his handiwork. And humanity, in its innocence, reflected his nature back to him. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the beginning of everything, and it was very, very good. The Garden of Eden. The earth was young, and the morning air carried a sweetness that has never been felt since. The man opened his eyes beneath the canopy of trees, and the world welcomed him. He walked through the garden without fear, for nothing in that place wished him harm. Every leaf, every stream, every creature moved in a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. God had planted this garden in a place called Eden to the east. He filled it with trees that were pleasing to look at and good for food. In the middle of the garden stood two trees of great importance. One was the tree of life. The other was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The man knew the garden well. He had given names to every creature that moved upon the earth. He had watched the rivers flow out from Eden, 4 of them spreading life to the lands beyond. The Pishon wound through Havilah, where gold was found. The Gihon passed through Cush. The Tigris and the Euphrates ran their long courses through the east. But the man did not wander beyond the garden's edge. He had no reason to leave. Then God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." So God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. While he slept, God took one of his ribs and closed up the place with flesh. From that rib, God built a woman. He brought her to the man, and the man awoke to see her standing before him. "At last," he said, "this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." That is why a man leaves his father and mother and holds fast to his wife, and the two become one flesh. In that garden, they stood together without shame. They wore no clothes, but they felt no need for them. Their hearts were open to each other and to God. In the cool of the evening, God walked through the garden. The man and the woman heard his voice and came to meet him. There was no distance between them, no fear, no hiding. They spoke as friends speak, and the garden held all of them in its green embrace. The woman came to know the garden as the man did. She learned which trees bore sweet fruit and which streams ran clear. She touched the petals of flowers and watched the birds build their nests. She saw the animals come to the man for their names, and she smiled at the wonder of it all. But there was one tree she did not touch. The man had told her what God said. You may eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will surely die. The woman understood this. She did not question it. She passed by that tree each day without stopping, and its fruit hung heavy and bright, but she kept her hands at her sides. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. It moved through the garden with a quiet grace, its scales catching the light. The woman had seen it many times. She had no reason to fear it, for nothing in the garden brought harm. One day the serpent came to her and spoke. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? The woman looked at the serpent. She was not surprised that it spoke, for she had not yet learned that such things were strange. We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, she said, but God did say, "You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." The serpent swayed slightly. Its voice was smooth, like water over stone. You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The woman looked at the tree. She had passed by it so many times that she had stopped truly seeing it. Now she looked with new eyes. The fruit was beautiful. It seemed to hold light within its skin. It promised something she had never thought to want. She reached out her hand. Her fingers closed around the fruit, and she pulled it from the branch. She took a bite. The taste filled her mouth, sweet and strange. She turned to the man who stood nearby. She did not have to say anything. She simply held out the fruit to him, and he took it. He ate. In that moment, something shifted. The air in the garden felt different, heavier. Their eyes were opened. They saw themselves as they had never seen before. The nakedness that had been natural now seemed wrong. Their bodies, which had been simple and good, now carried a weight of awareness they could not bear. They looked at each other, and shame crept in like a shadow. They grabbed fig leaves and sewed them together. They made coverings for themselves, rough and clumsy. Then they heard the sound of God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid among the trees. God called to the man, "Where are you?" The man's voice came from behind the leaves. "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." "Who told you that you were naked?" God asked. "Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from?" The man stepped forward. His words came quickly. "The woman you put here with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate." God turned to the woman. "What have you done?" The woman looked down. "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." There was a silence in the garden. The leaves stopped their rustling. The birds held their songs. Then God spoke to the serpent. "Cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." To the woman, God said, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." To the man, God said, "Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree, the ground is cursed because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and dust you will return." The man and the woman stood silent. They had come into the garden as guests, and now they were being shown the door. They no longer belonged in this place. The ground that had given them life would now resist their hands. The labor that had been joy would now be toil. God made garments of skin for them. He clothed them with his own hands, covering their shame. Then he said, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." So God banished them from the Garden of Eden. He sent them out to work the ground from which they had been taken. And at the east of the garden, he placed cherubim and a flaming sword that flashed back and forth, guarding the way to the tree of life. The man and the woman walked out of the garden. They did not look back. Behind them, the gates of Eden closed in light and fire. Before them, the wide world stretched, wild and untamed. The ground would yield its bounty, but only through struggle. The days would bring joy, but also sorrow. They would know love, but also loss. They walked on together, the man and the woman, carrying within them the knowledge they had gained. They had chosen to know good and evil, and now they would learn what that meant. The garden was behind them. The world lay ahead, and somewhere within the woman, life was already beginning to grow, a promise and a burden both. The first day outside Eden passed. The sun set in a sky that seemed vaster than any they had known. They lay down on the ground that would now be their home, and they slept. In their dreams, they walked again in the garden, but when they woke, they remembered where they were, and they wept. But even in their tears, something stirred. The man reached for the woman's hand, and she took it. They were no longer innocent, but they were not alone. That knowledge, too, was new. They would carry it with them into the fields and the valleys, into the years and the generations that would follow. Eden was lost, but the story was not over. It was only beginning. Cain and Abel. The world outside the garden was not the world they had known. The ground was harder now, and the air carried a weight that had not been there before. Adam and Eve worked with their hands, pulling weeds from the soil, coaxing life from the stubborn earth. They did not speak of the garden often. Some memories were too sharp to hold for long. In time, Eve gave birth to a son. She named him Cain, for she said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." The words were a hope, a small flame against the vastness of their new life. Then she bore another son, Abel. Two boys grew up in the shadow of the loss, their laughter filling the spaces where silence had settled. The boys were different from the start. Cain was strong and quick, his hands always moving, always building. He liked the earth, the feel of soil between his fingers, the way seeds became plants under his care. He was a tiller of the ground, a man who worked the fields from dawn until the light failed. Abel was quieter, gentler. He kept the flocks, walking with the sheep across the hills, learning their ways. He spoke to them in soft tones, and they followed him without fear. Their father told them about the garden. He spoke of trees that bore fruit without toil, of rivers that ran clear and cool, of a presence that walked in the cool of the day. The boys listened, but the garden was a story to them, something distant and strange. They knew only this world, with its thorns and its sweat, its long days and its quiet nights. As the years passed, the brothers grew into men. They brought offerings to the Lord, each in his own way. Cain brought the fruit of his fields, the best of his harvest, the grain and the vines he had tended with care. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, the choicest of the lambs, and he offered them with a humble heart. The Lord looked upon Abel's offering with favor. The smoke rose straight and clear, a sign of acceptance. But when the Lord looked upon Cain's offering, he did not accept it. The smoke from Cain's altar drifted sideways, thin and uncertain, as if the wind had turned against him. Cain's face darkened, his jaw tightened. He stood before his altar, the grain still burning, and he felt a cold knot grow in his chest. He did not understand. He had worked so hard, he had given the best he had. Why had his brother's gift been received and his own turned away? The Lord spoke to Cain, his voice like a quiet wind moving through the fields. "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." The words were a warning, a hand extended in the darkness, but Cain's heart was hard, and the warning did not penetrate. He stood in the field, the smell of his offering still in his nostrils, and he felt the anger grow. It was not just the rejection, it was the favor shown to Abel. The way their parents looked at Abel with pride, the way the sheep seemed to gather around him as if they knew something Cain did not. Days passed. Cain worked his fields, but his mind was elsewhere. He saw Abel in the distance, walking with his flocks, and the sight stirred something in him. A thought took root, small at first, then spreading like weeds through a garden. He pushed it down, but it kept rising. One day, Cain went out to the field and found Abel there. The sheep grazed nearby, their heads low, their tails flicking at flies. Abel looked up and smiled, but the smile faded when he saw his brother's face. "Let us go into the field," Cain said. His voice was flat, careful. Abel nodded. He had always trusted his brother. They walked together across the open ground, the grass brushing their legs, the sun high overhead. The sheep followed at a distance, bleating softly. When they reached the far edge of the field, Cain stopped. Abel stopped too, turning to look at him. There was a moment of stillness, the kind that comes before a storm. Then Cain's hands moved. He had brought a stone, hidden among the folds of his garment. He struck his brother once with all the strength of his anger. Abel fell to the ground, his eyes wide with surprise, and then they went still. Cain stood over the body. The silence pressed in around him. The sheep had stopped grazing. They stood in a cluster watching, their eyes dark and unblinking. Cain looked at his hands. There was blood on them, red and wet, and he wiped them on his clothes, but they would not come clean. He left the field. He walked back toward the place where his family lived, his legs heavy, his mind blank. When he reached the edge of the cleared land, he heard a voice. It was the Lord, and his voice was calm, but it carried a weight that crushed the air. "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain's throat tightened. He thought of lies, of half-truths, of ways to turn the question aside. But the words that came out were not the ones he had planned. "I do not know," he said. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The silence stretched. Then the Lord spoke again, and his voice was sorrowful, heavy with grief. "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain felt the words land like blows. He would be cut off from the land he loved, from the fields he had tilled, from everything he knew. He would be a wanderer, a man without a home, and anyone who found him could strike him down. "My punishment is more than I can bear," he said. "Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will unlive me." But the Lord marked him. A sign placed upon his brow, a sign that said no one should harm him. And Cain left that place, carrying his mark and his grief, walking east into the unknown. In the days that followed, Adam and Eve waited for their sons to return. When the hours passed and only one figure appeared on the horizon, they knew. The grief that came upon them was not like the grief of the garden. That had been a loss of place, a loss of innocence. This was a loss of flesh and blood, of a son who had smiled and laughed and walked among the sheep. Eve wept. Adam held her, his face gray with sorrow. They did not speak of Cain. His name became a wound, a thing too painful to touch. They tended the ground and they mourned and they wondered if the world would ever feel whole again. But the world went on. The seasons turned. The sheep multiplied and the fields grew green in the spring. And in the quiet hours of the evening, like when the light slanted low across the land, Adam and Eve sat together and remembered. They remembered a boy who had walked with his flock, who had spoken to the lambs in gentle tones. They remembered his offering, the smoke rising straight and true. And they remembered the other boy, the one with the strong hands and the anger in his heart. And they wondered if they could have seen it coming, if there was something they might have done. There was no answer. There never is. The days passed and the world continued, and the story of the two brothers settled into the soil like seeds, waiting for the rain. The generations of Adam, the ground that had received Abel's blood, lay quiet. Cain had gone east, carrying his mark and his shame. Adam and Eve knew the weight of that absence, a son gone forever, another son lost to the wandering. The silence in their home was heavy, and they felt the cold of it. But life does not stop for grief. It moves forward like a river that cannot turn back. Adam knew his wife again, and she conceived. The child came into the world with a cry, and Eve held him close. She named him Seth. She said, "God has given me another child in place of Abel." There was hope in her voice, a small light in the dark. Seth grew. He was not like his brother Cain. There was a quietness in him, a stillness that reminded Adam of the days before the fall. Seth had eyes that looked beyond the fields and the flocks. He looked to the heavens. He looked to the one who had made him. And Adam taught him the ways of the garden, the memory of walking with God in the cool of the evening. Seth listened. He took those words into his heart and kept them there. The years passed. Adam saw his son grow into a man. He saw Seth take a wife, and he saw the line continue. There was comfort in that. The promise of the seed, the hope of the one who would crush the serpent's head, lived on in Seth's blood. Adam held that hope close, like a man holding a small flame against the wind. Adam lived long. He saw children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren spreading across the land. His eyes grew dim, his hands grew weak, but his spirit remained. He was a man who had seen the face of God in the garden. He had walked with him in the cool of the day. That memory never left him. It shaped everything he did, everything he said. When Adam died, the earth felt his loss. He was 930 years old. The father of all living things had returned to the dust from which he was taken. The land mourned in its own way. The rivers kept flowing, the trees kept growing, but there was a sense that something great had passed. A giant among men had gone home. Seth carried his father's legacy. He was now the head of the line, the keeper of the promise. He walked in the way of Adam, the way of the garden, the way of God. And God looked upon Seth with favor. The line would not break. The promise would not fail. Seth's son was named Enosh. It was in his days that people began to call upon the name of the Lord. This was not a small thing. It was a turning, a shift in the hearts of men. They remembered the garden. They remembered the voice that walked among the trees, and they lifted their voices to that one, seeking him in the quiet of their tents and beneath the vast sky. Enosh lived and had sons and daughters. The line grew, spreading like branches from a single trunk. Each generation carried the story forward. They told their children about the garden, about the serpent, about the promise. The words passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, like a flame passed from hand to hand. Then came Kenan, then Mahalalel, then Jared. Each name added to the list, each life a thread in the great tapestry. They lived long in those days, their years stretching far beyond what we know now. They saw the world change. They saw the land fill with people, but they also saw something else. They saw the darkness creep in. Wickedness began to spread, slowly at first, then faster. The hearts of men turned away from the light. They forgot the garden. They forgot the voice. They made their own paths, their own gods, their own ways. The line of Seth stood as a small island of faithfulness in a rising sea of rebellion. It was in this time that Enoch was born. He was the seventh from Adam, and there was something different about him from the very beginning. His mother looked at him and felt a stirring in her spirit. She knew somehow that this child would walk a different road. Enoch grew. He did not follow the ways of the world around him. He did not chase the pleasures that drew others away. He walked with God. This is the phrase that marks his life, the simple but profound truth of his days. Enoch walked with God. What does that mean? It means he lived his life in the presence of the Almighty. He did not just believe in God. He did not just offer sacrifices and go home. He walked with him. He talked with him. He shared his days and his nights, his joys and his sorrows, his questions and his fears. There was an intimacy between Enoch and his Maker that few have ever known. Enoch lived for 365 years. That is a long time by any measure. But the years did not wear him down. They refined him. Each year drew him closer to the one he loved. He became a man of prophecy, speaking the words that God gave him. He warned the people of their wickedness. He told them of a coming judgment, a day when the Lord would come with 10,000s of his holy ones. But the people did not listen. Their hearts were hard, their ears were closed. Yet Enoch did not grow weary. He kept walking. He kept trusting, and there came a day when his walk came to its end. But it was not the end that comes to all men. It was not the dust and the grave. For Enoch, the walk simply continued. God took him. The scripture says it plainly. Enoch walked with God. And he was no more, for God took him. He did not taste death. He passed from this life into the presence of the one he had walked with all his days. It was a translation, a changing, a going home. The line of Seth had produced its first true wonder, a man who pleased God so completely that death had no claim on him. Enoch left behind a son named Methuselah, and Methuselah's name carried a weight of its own. It meant something. Some say it was a prophecy. The year Methuselah died, the flood came. His life was a marker, a countdown of mercy. 969 years he lived, longer than any man who ever walked the earth. But his long life was not an accident. It was grace, the patience of God, waiting, waiting, waiting for the world to turn back to him. Methuselah had a son named Lamech, and Lamech had a son named Noah. When Noah was born, his father spoke words of hope. He said, "This one will bring us comfort from our work, from the toil of our hands, from the ground the Lord has cursed." It was a longing, a prayer, a hope that this child would be different. And Noah grew. He was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. He walked with God like his father Enoch before him. In a world that had turned completely away, Noah stood firm. He was a light in the darkness, a voice in the silence, a man who would one day find favor in the eyes of the Lord. The generations of Adam stretch out before us like a long road. We see the line from Seth to Noah, each name a step on the journey. There were many sons and daughters along the way, many lives lived and lost, but the thread of the promise held. It never broke, it never frayed. The world was growing darker. The thoughts of men were evil all the time. Violence filled the land. The creation that had been so good was now groaning under the weight of sin. But God saw Noah. God saw the one who walked with him. And in that seeing, there was hope. The story of the generations of Adam is the story of God's faithfulness. It is the story of a promise kept, a line preserved, a hope carried through the ages. Adam had failed, Cain had fallen, but Seth had risen, and from his line would come the deliverer. Not just Noah, not just the ark, but the seed that would crush the serpent's head, the Messiah who would one day come. For now the world waits. The darkness grows, but the light is not extinguished. Noah walks with God, and in that walk the future begins to take shape, the great flood. The generations pass like sand through an open hand. Adam's line stretched long, and each father told his children of the garden, of the voice that walked in the cool of the evening, of the tree they should not have touched. But the telling grew thin. The knowing grew dim. By the days of Noah, the earth had filled with people, and the people had filled their days with trouble. Violence spread like weeds in a field. Every thought of every heart was bent toward harm. The morning light found cruelty in the streets, and the evening shadows hid worse deeds. The cries of the wounded rose up like smoke, and the earth itself seemed to groan under the weight of what was done upon her. God looked upon what he had made. He saw the beauty twisted. He saw the good turned sour, and his heart was heavy within him. This is a hard thing to speak of, but the ancient words say it plainly. He regretted that he had made humanity on the earth. The sorrow was deep, like a river that cuts through stone. Yet in this darkness, one man walked a different path. Noah. His name means rest, and there was rest in him. He walked with God as Enoch had done before him. Not perfectly, for no one is perfect, but he listened. He trusted. He did not run with the crowd that ran toward ruin. God spoke to Noah. The words came clear, as words come to those who have learned to be still. The Maker of all things told Noah what his heart intended. The earth had become corrupt. It was filled with violence. Every living thing had gone its own crooked way. So God would bring a great water upon the land, a flood that would wash away the old and make room for what could come after. But Noah found favor. This is the heart of the matter. The grace of God found a man, and that man found grace. God gave Noah a task: build an ark, a vessel of gopher wood, rooms within it, pitch within and without to seal it against the water. The measurements were given with care: 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high, a window for light, a door on the side, 3 decks within. Noah did not question. He did not argue with the maker of the seas about the coming of a flood, though rain had never fallen on the earth. The ground was watered by mist that rose from the land. Men had never seen a storm such as this would be, but Noah heard the word of his God, and he began to build. Think of the strangeness of this sight. A man far from any sea building a great ship on dry land. His neighbors passed by and shook their heads. Some laughed, some mocked. They asked him why he wasted his days on such a foolish thing. Noah said little. He swung his hammer. He set beam against beam. He worked while they joked. The years passed. The ark grew. It stood like a strange hill against the sky. A door stood open in its side, waiting. And every day the people of that time went about their business. They planted fields. They built houses. They married and gave in marriage. They feasted and traded and argued and slept. The ark was a curiosity, a tale to tell, a strange old man's dream in a world that had no room for dreams. Noah's sons helped him, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Their wives came into the family. They worked beside their father, cutting wood, shaping timbers, carrying pitch. They did not fully understand what was coming, but they trusted the voice that their father trusted. The animals came. This is the wonder of it. When the time drew near, God brought the creatures to Noah, 2 of every kind, male and female, clean animals 7 pairs, unclean 1 pair. The birds of the air, the beasts of the field, the creeping things that move along the ground, they came without fear, as if a great shepherd led them. They walked up the ramp and into the waiting rooms of the ark. The people watched this. They saw lions and lambs enter the same door. They saw eagles and sparrows perched together in the rafters. Surely some of them felt a stirring of wonder. Surely some of them wondered if perhaps the old man had been right, but their wonder did not turn to action. Their thoughts did not become repentance. They stood at a distance and watched, and their hearts stayed hard. Then God spoke to Noah one final time, "Come into the ark, you and your household. For you alone have I found righteous in this generation." Noah gathered his wife, his sons, and his sons' wives, 8 souls in all. They entered the ark, and the Lord shut the door behind them. Think on that. God himself closed that door. No one else could open it. No one else could enter after it was shut. The mercy had a limit. The patience had an end. For 7 days they waited inside the ark. The animals settled into their places. The family found their quarters. Through the window, they could see the sky beyond, still clear, still ordinary. Perhaps some of them wondered if it would truly happen. Perhaps even Noah felt the weight of waiting. Then the waters came. The springs of the great deep burst open. The floodgates of the heavens were unlocked. Water rose from below and fell from above. The rain came down like a curtain, like a wall of falling glass. Day and night it fell. The laughter of the mockers died in their throats. The shouts of the crowds turned to cries. The water covered the ground. It rose over the fields and the houses. It climbed the hills and filled the valleys. The people climbed to their rooftops, then to their high places. But the water kept rising. It covered the mountains. It rose 15 cubits above the highest peak. Every living thing that moved upon the earth perished. The birds of the air, the cattle, the wild beasts, the creeping things, and every human being who had drawn breath. All that was left was the ark, floating on the face of the waters. The same waters that had destroyed the world carried the vessel that held its hope. The ark drifted steady and sure, held in the hand of God. The flood covered the earth for 150 days. Inside there must have been long silences. The sound of rain on the roof, the low sounds of animals in their stalls, the creak of timbers as the vessel rode the waves. Noah's family cared for the creatures. They kept them fed, they kept them calm. They did not know how long this would last. They only knew that they were safe within the shelter God had made for them. The rain stopped, the waters began to go down. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, but that they did not leave yet. They waited. Noah opened the window and sent out a raven. It flew back and forth until the waters had dried from the earth. Then he sent a dove. The dove found no place to rest and returned to him. He waited 7 days and sent it again. The dove came back with an olive leaf in its mouth, fresh life, rising from the death. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove a 3rd time. It did not return. Noah looked out and saw the ground. The earth was drying. The old world was gone. The new world lay before them, still wet, still waiting. God spoke to Noah, "Leave the ark, bring out every living thing that is with you. Let them breed abundantly on the earth. Let them be fruitful and multiply." Noah opened the door. The light poured in, bright and clean. The family stepped out onto ground that had known only water for months. The animals followed, pair by pair, filling the land again. The The silence of the flood gave way to the sounds of a world beginning once more. Noah built an altar and offered sacrifices to God. He gave thanks for deliverance. He bowed his heart before the one who had seen him through the deep. The flood had ended. The waters had done their work. The old had passed away. What would come next, Noah did not yet know. He only knew that he was standing on dry ground with his family around him, and the smell of rain still in the air, and the voice of God still speaking in his heart. After the flood, the waters had finally gone. For so long, the world had been a sea without end, a vast and silent expanse under a sky that seemed to hold its breath. But now the ground was appearing again, soft and dark and wet, and the air smelled of earth and rain and new beginnings. Noah stepped out of the ark with his family around him, and the animals followed in their long procession, 2 by 2, then more, until the hillside was alive with movement and sound. The earth was clean. That was the first thing Noah felt. It was not the same earth he had known before, the one with the great cities and the loud voices and the endless noise of people pushing against each other. That earth was gone. What remained was quiet, almost tender, like a field after the harvest. The mud clung to his feet, thick and heavy, and he let it. He wanted to feel the ground again. He wanted to remember what it meant to stand on something solid. His sons stood with him, Shem and Ham and Japheth and their wives and his own wife, all of them silent for a long while. There was no need for words. They had been through something that had no name, something that had taken everything they knew and left them here, standing on a wet hill with the sun breaking through the clouds for the first time in what felt like forever. The animals moved around them, sniffing the air, testing the ground with their hooves and paws. Birds took flight, uncertain at first, then stronger, circling higher and higher until they were just specks against the blue. Noah watched them go. He thought of the raven he had sent out, the one that had flown back and forth until the waters had dried. He thought of the dove the second time, returning with the olive leaf in her beak, green and fresh and full of promise. That had been the moment, he knew now. That was when the world had started to breathe again. He built an altar there, on that hill. It was not a grand thing, just stones piled carefully, one on top of another, the way his father had taught him, the way his grandfather had taught his father. He placed wood on it, dry wood from the trees that had survived, and he chose from the clean animals the ones that were meant for such a purpose. The smoke rose straight up into the air, gray and thin, and it carried with it the smell of sacrifice, the old smell, the smell that had been missing from the earth for so long. And God smelled it. That is how the story goes. God smelled the pleasing aroma, and something in his heart turned toward mercy. He spoke to Noah then, not in a voice that thundered, but in the quiet way that had always been his way with this man. He said that he would never again curse the ground because of people, even though he knew their hearts, even though he knew that every inclination of their hearts was toward trouble from their youth. He said that he would never again strike down every living thing as he had done. Noah listened. He did not understand everything, not fully. He was a man of the soil, a man who knew the seasons and the weather and the way seeds grow in the dark. He knew that promises were heavy things, that they carried weight and meaning. He knew that when someone made a promise, they were binding themselves to something beyond their own will. And here was the creator of all things making a promise to him, to this man who had walked with him through the flood and out the other side. Never again. Those words settled into Noah like stones into a riverbed. Never again would the waters rise to cover the mountains. Never again would the deep break open and swallow the land. The rain would fall, yes, and the rivers would swell, but they would not become that. They would not become the end. And then God gave a sign. It came in the sky after the clouds had begun to gather again, after the sun had shifted behind them. A bow appeared, curved and bright, spanning the heavens in colors that had no name before that moment. Red and gold and green and blue, all of them woven together in an arc of light. Noah looked up at it, and he felt something release in his chest, something he had been carrying since the first drop of rain had fallen. A bow, a weapon of war, hung in the sky, not to strike, but to promise. God said that whenever the clouds gathered, whenever the rain came down, the Bao would appear, and he would remember. He would remember the covenant, the promise, the bond between himself and every living creature. It was not for Noah alone, this sign. It was for the birds that had flown from the ark, for the animals that had wandered out into the new world, for every generation that would come after, all the way down to the end of time. Noah stood there for a long time, his neck craned up at that arc of light. He thought about the things he had seen, the things that no one else would ever see. The waters rising day after day, swallowing the hills, the valleys, the cities where people had laughed and argued and loved and hated. He thought about the faces he had known, the ones that had not made it onto the ark, the ones that had been carried away by the flood. He did not let himself dwell on them for long. That way led to darkness, and he had walked through enough darkness. He turned back to his family. They were looking at the sky too, all of them, their faces lifted toward the bow. Even the children of his sons, the ones who had been born in the ark, the ones who had never known a world without water. They were staring up at the colors with wide eyes. They did not know what it meant. Not yet. But they would learn. Noah would tell them, and they would tell their children, and the story would pass from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, like a seed carried by the wind. That night they made camp on the hillside. The ground was still damp, but it was solid, and that was enough. They built a fire, and the flames crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the dark. The stars came out one by one, then in their thousands, scattered across the sky like grain thrown by a generous hand. Noah lay on his back and looked up at them, and he thought about the promise. He thought about the bow, still there in his mind, burned into his memory like a brand. The world was different now. It was softer, slower, more careful. The animals that had come out of the ark were the same ones that had gone in, but they seemed changed somehow, quieter, more watchful. The land stretched out in every direction, empty and waiting. There was room to grow, room to build, room to begin again. And that was the gift, Noah realized. Not just the promise, but the chance. The chance to start over, to do it better, to remember what had been lost and honor it with what would come. He thought about his sons, about the families they would raise, about the children who would run on this new ground and never know the terror of the rising waters. He thought about the generations that would come, the ones who would look up at the sky after a storm and see the bow, and maybe not know the full story, but know that it meant something, that it meant hope, that it meant the world was held in hands that would not let go. The fire burned low, and the night grew deep. Noah did not sleep, not right away. He stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the new world, the wind in the trees, the distant call of an animal, the soft breathing of his family around him. He felt the weight of the moment, the weight of being the one who had seen the end and the beginning, the one who carried the memory of what had been and the hope of what would be. In the morning, they would begin. They would plant seeds, build shelters, carve out a life on this fresh ground. They would multiply and fill the earth as they had been told to do. And they would remember always the promise that hung in the sky like a bridge between heaven and earth, a sign that the waters would not rise again, a sign that mercy had found a place in the heart of God. Noah closed his eyes, and the last thing he saw before sleep took him was the bow, still glowing faintly behind his lids. He smiled, a small smile, the first one in a long time. The world was new, and it was good, and the promise was sure. The Tower of Babel. The waters had gone down. The earth was dry again. The rainbow still hung in the clouds, a quiet promise that the flood would never return. Noah's children came out of the ark into a world washed clean, and they spread across the land. They had children, and those children had children. The world filled up again, slowly, like a cup being refilled drop by drop. For a long while, the people stayed close together. They moved as one great family, walking east from the mountains where the ark had come to rest. They found a wide plain in the land of Shinar, a place where the soil was dark and rich, where the rivers gave them water, and the grass was green for their flocks. It seemed good to them, so they stopped there, and they made their home. The people were many. Their tents covered the plain like scattered stones. Their fires glowed at night, and the sound of their voices carried across the land. They spoke one language, the same words and the same sounds. A man from the far side of the camp could speak to a man at the center, light, and they understood each other perfectly. There was no confusion, no shaking of heads, no guessing at meanings. Every word meant the same thing to every ear. In those days, the people learned to make bricks. It was a new skill, a craft that took time and care. They found clay in the earth, dark and heavy, and they mixed it with water until it became soft. They shaped it with their hands into blocks, and they baked them in the fire until they were hard as stone. The bricks were good, they were strong and steady, and they could be stacked one upon another to make walls that would stand for years. The people looked at their bricks and saw what they could do. They saw the power in their hands, the skill in their minds. They had survived the flood. They had multiplied and filled the land. Now they wanted more. They wanted to make something that would last, something that would reach up into the sky and touch the heavens themselves. So they said to one another, "Come, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." The words passed from mouth to mouth. The idea grew like a fire spreads through dry grass. They gathered in the center of the plain, and they began to work. Men dug clay from the ground with their hands and with tools of wood and stone. Women carried water from the rivers to mix with the earth. Children ran between the workers, carrying small loads, learning the craft of their parents. The tower rose from the ground. It started as a wide base, broad as a hill, made of layer upon layer of brick. The workers set each brick carefully, with tar between the layers to hold them fast. The tar was black and sticky, and it made the walls solid and sure. They worked from morning until evening, and when the sun went down, they did not stop. They lit torches and kept working through the night, because the desire to build had taken hold of them. Day by day, the tower grew. It reached the height of a tall tree, then the height of a hill, then higher still. The people climbed up its sides on wooden ladders and stone steps. They carried bricks on their backs, and they passed them from hand to hand up the long lines of workers. The tower had a name among them. They called it Babel. Some scholars suggest that in the old tongue of that land, the word may have meant gate of God, a name born of their hope that the tower would open a way to the heavens. But the story told among the people, the one passed down through the generations, holds a different meaning. In their own language, the sound of the name echoed another word, a word that meant confusion, and that meaning would prove truer than the first. The work went on for years. The tower became a mountain of brick and tar, rising above the plain like a finger pointing at the sky. The people looked at it and were pleased. They had made something great. They had made something that no one had ever made before. They were not scattered. They were not weak. They were one people with one language, and they were building a path to the very dwelling place of the Most High. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the children of men had built. He looked upon their work, and he saw the pride in their hearts. They did not build to give thanks. They did not build to honor the one who had saved them from the waters. They built to make a name for themselves. They built because they thought they could reach the heavens with their own hands, that they could stand beside their Maker as equals. The Lord saw their hearts, and he saw what would come of their work. If they could do this thing, there would be no end to what they would do next. Their pride would grow like the tower itself, higher and higher, until they forgot that they were dust, formed from the ground and destined to return to it. So the Lord acted, but he did not destroy the tower with fire, and he did not shake it with an earthquake. He did something quieter, something that reached into the very minds of the people. He confused their language. The change came without warning. A man on the top of the tower called down to his friend below, asking for more bricks. But the words that came from his mouth were strange sounds, sounds that his friend had never heard before. The friend looked up with confusion on his face. He shook his head. He called back, but his own words were also strange, twisted into a form that no one could understand. All across the plain, the same thing happened. Men spoke, and their words were like the babbling of streams, like the sound of wind through the reeds. They could not understand one another. The man who carried bricks did not know what the man who laid them was asking. The one who mixed tar could not understand the one who brought water. They shouted, and their shouts became a chaos of sounds, a confusion that filled the air like the noise of 1,000 birds all crying at once. The work stopped. The tower stood unfinished, its sides rough and bare in places, its top open to the sky. The people looked at one another, and they saw strangers where their brothers and sisters had been. The one language that had bound them together was gone, shattered into many pieces, and each piece could not speak to the others. Groups formed around the new languages. Those who could understand one another gathered together, drawn by the familiar sounds of their own words. They packed their belongings. They gathered their flocks and their herds. They walked away from the great city, away from the tower that reached toward the heavens, and they spread out across the earth. The plain of Shinar became empty. The dust blew across the abandoned bricks. The tower stood alone, a monument to pride, its top never finished, its purpose never achieved. The gate of God had become a place of confusion, a reminder that no wall of brick and tar can reach the heavens, and no name made by human hands can stand against the will of the Lord. The people scattered, each group going its own way. They carried their languages with them like seeds in a pouch, and those seeds grew into the many tongues of the earth. The unity of the first days was gone, broken by the very desire that had driven them to build. And so the world changed. The one family of Noah became many families, each with its own words, its own customs, its own lands. The tower crumbled with time, its bricks scattered and weathered, its memory passing into story and song. But the lesson remained, written in the hearts of those who heard the tale, that pride builds towers that fall, and the Lord scatters the plans of those who seek to make themselves great. The people of the earth spread far and wide, across deserts and mountains, along rivers and seas. They filled the lands that the flood had washed clean, and they made their homes in every corner of the world. The languages divided them, but the blood of Noah ran in all of them, and the promise of the rainbow still held over them all. For now the tower stood silent on the empty plain. The winds blew through its unfinished top, the rains washed its sides, and the people of the earth went their separate ways, carrying with them the memory of a time when all the world spoke one language, and the dream of a day when the confusion would be undone. The call of Abram. The scattering at Babel left its mark on the earth. Families gathered what they could carry and walked away from the half-built tower. They spread across the land like seeds thrown by a strong wind. Each group carried its own tongue, its own ways, its own small gods of wood and stone. Generations passed. The languages multiplied. The people filled the valleys and the hills. In the land of Ur, a city of mud brick houses and moon temples, there lived a man named Abram. He was the son of Terah, a maker of idols. Abram had a wife, Sarai, whose beauty was known throughout the city. He had a nephew, Lot, whose father had died young, and so Abram cared for him as his own. Abram was not a young man. His hair had begun to gray at the temples. His hands bore the calluses of a shepherd and a trader. He had wealth, flocks and herds, silver and gold. He had a name in Ur, a place among the elders. The gods of Ur were many. They were gods of the moon and the stars, gods of the river and the harvest. They were gods who demanded offerings and gave nothing back. Abram had grown tired of their silence. He had stood before their statues, smelled the burning incense, heard the prayers of the priests, and he had felt nothing. Then came the voice. It came to him in the quiet of the night, when the city slept and the stars hung low over the desert. It came not as thunder or fire, but as a knowing, a certainty that settled into his bones. "Leave your country," the voice said. "Leave your people, leave your father's household. Go to the land I will show you." Abram sat up in the darkness. His heart beat against his ribs. "I will make you into a great nation," the voice continued. "I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Then the voice was gone. Abram sat in the silence. He waited for more, but nothing came. Only the wind moving through the date palms, only the distant sound of a dog barking in the city. He did not sleep that night. He sat at the window and looked out at the stars. They seemed different now, closer, as if they had been placed there just for him. In the morning he told Sarai. She listened without speaking. Her dark eyes studied his face. She had seen him troubled before over lost sheep or failed trades. But this was different. This was a man who had heard something. He spoke to me, Abram said. Not with a mouth, not with a voice in the air, but I heard him. I know I heard him. Who? Sarai asked. I do not know his name. He did not give it. Sarai was silent for a long moment. Then she said, You want to leave? Yes. Leave Ur? Leave your father? Leave everything we have built? Yes. She looked at him. The years of their life together passed between them, the joys, the sorrows, the quiet evenings, the shared meals. She could have said no. She could have refused. But she saw in his eyes something she had never seen before. A certainty. A peace. Then we go, she said. Abram's father, Terah, was old. His hands shook when he held his cup. His eyes were clouded with the years. You would leave your father in his final days? Terah asked. I would have you come with us, Abram said. The voice said to leave my father's household, but it did not forbid me from asking you to join me. Terah laughed, a dry sound like stones rubbing together. Join you? Where are you going? You do not even know. I will know when I arrive. And your gods? The gods of Ur? The gods of your fathers? Abram was quiet. Then he said, There is only one voice that speaks. I have heard it. I will follow it. Terah shook his head, but something in his eyes softened. Perhaps he saw in his son a restlessness he remembered from his own youth. Perhaps he recalled his own dreams, long since set aside by the weight of daily life. Then I will come, Terah said. Not because I believe, because you are my son. So they gathered their household. Abram's flocks were many, his herds spread across the grazing lands outside Ur, his servants numbered in the dozens. Sarai packed the household goods. Lot, the young nephew, asked no questions. He simply packed his own belongings and joined the caravan. They set out together, Abram and Sarai, Terah and Lot and all their people. The caravan stretched long across the desert. The sheep bleated. The cattle lowed. The servants walked in a line, carrying baskets and bundles. They went north, following the curve of the great river. They passed through villages and towns, past fields of barley and orchards of figs. The days were long and hot. The nights were cold and clear. They came to a place called Haran. It was a trading city, a crossroads where caravans met and merchants bargained. The land was good there, the water was sweet, the grazing was rich, and there they stopped. Terah was tired, his bones ached. He said, Let us rest here for a while. I am old, I cannot go further. So they settled in Haran, they built houses, they planted fields. The years passed, Terah grew older, his breath became short. His steps became slow. One evening he closed his eyes and did not open them again. They buried him in Haran beneath a stone that Abram set himself. Abram stood at the grave and remembered his father's words, You do not even know where you are going. And he did not. But the voice had not spoken again since that first night in Ur. Abram waited. He watched the horizon. He listened in the silence. The voice did not come. But the call did not fade. It sat in his chest like a stone. It pressed against his ribs. It reminded him every morning when he woke, every evening when he lay down, that he was not meant to stay in Haran. My father is gone, he told Sarai. There is nothing keeping us here now. You still do not know where we are going, she said. No, but I know who called me. And you will follow him without knowing the way? Yes. Sarai looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. Then we go. They gathered again. The flocks had grown in Haran, the herds had multiplied, the servants had increased. Abram's household was now a small army of people and animals. He stood at the edge of the camp and looked south. The road led toward Canaan, a land he had heard of but never seen. The voice had not named it, but Abram felt a pull in that direction, a gentle but constant tug. To Canaan, he said. The caravan moved. The dust rose, the sun beat down. They traveled through lands that were strange to them. They passed through territories ruled by kings they did not know. They crossed rivers and climbed hills. The people they met spoke different tongues, the customs were foreign, but Abram did not turn back. The voice had said, I will make you into a great nation. And Abram, though he had no children, though Sarai's womb was barren, though he was old and his wife was old, Abram believed. It was not a loud belief. It was not a shouting, dancing, arms-waving belief. It was quiet. It was steady. It was the belief of a man who had heard a voice in the night and knew that the voice was true. They came at last to a place called Shechem. It was a valley between two mountains, green and fertile. The oak trees stood tall. The springs ran clear, and there the voice spoke again. "This is the land," it said. "I will give it to your offspring." Abram fell to his knees. He pressed his hands to the earth. The dust of Canaan clung to his fingers. For a long time he stayed that way. The caravan waited. The animals grazed. The servants spoke in low voices, uncertain of what their master was doing. At last Abram rose. He built an altar of stones. He placed wood upon it. He offered a sacrifice there to the God who had spoken, and he called out the name of the Lord. Sarai stood at a distance. She watched her husband. She saw the dust on his knees, the tears on his cheeks, the fire rising from the altar. She did not understand everything. She did not know where this road would lead, but she saw his face, and she saw that the emptiness was gone, and she was glad. The voice had promised a great nation. Abram had no children. He was old. Sarai was old. The years were running out like water through fingers. But Abram did not count the years. He counted the promises. The caravan moved south. They passed through the land, stopping where the grazing was good, moving on when the season changed. Abram built altars as he went. He called on the name of the Lord in every place he stopped. The land was not empty. There were people there, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hittites. They had their own gods, their own ways. They looked at Abram's caravan with suspicion and curiosity. But Abram did not fear them. He did not try to take their cities or claim their fields. He simply walked through the land, a stranger passing through, holding in his heart a promise he could not see. The years would bring many things. There would be famine. There would be journeys to foreign lands. There would be tests of faith and moments of doubt. But on that first day, standing in the valley of Shechem, Abram did not know any of that. He only knew that he had heard a voice, and he had followed it, and the voice had spoken again. That was enough. The call of Abram was not a single moment. It was a lifetime. It was a road that stretched beyond the horizon, a promise that outlived the one who heard it. He was just a man, a shepherd, a trader, a son of an idol maker from the city of Ur, but he heard a voice, and he followed. That made all the difference. Abram and Lot did. The land could not hold them both. That was the truth of it. Abram had come out of Haran with everything he owned, and Lot had come with him. Their flocks had grown in the new land. Their herds had multiplied. Their tents spread wide across the hills of Canaan. And with all that growth came a problem. The grass ran thin where too many sheep grazed. The water holes turned to mud when too many cattle drank. The herders who watched over Abram's animals began to argue with the herders who watched over Lot's animals. Words flew like stones. Tempers rose with the dust. Abram heard the fighting from his tent. He heard the sharp voices of young men who had worked too long in the sun. He heard the bleating of sheep and the lowing of cattle, and he knew that something had to give. So he called Lot to him. The two of them stood outside the tent, looking out at the wide land that stretched before them. The hills rolled gentle and brown. The sky pressed down, clear and blue. Abram spoke first. His voice was calm, the voice of a man who had learned to choose peace over pride. "Let there be no strife between us," he said. "We are family. Our herders may fight, but we must not. The whole land is before us. Separate from me and take your choice. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." It was a generous offer. Abram was the elder. He had been called by God. The promise had been given to him. But he did not claim the best land for himself. He did not pull rank. He simply opened his hands and let his nephew choose. Lot looked out at the land. He was a young man, and the world still seemed wide and full of promise. He had grown up in the shadow of his uncle, following where Abram led. Now, for the first time, he had a choice of his own. His eyes fell on the Jordan Valley. It lay before them like a green ribbon in a brown land. The river ran through it, and where the river ran, the grass grew thick and tall. The trees stood heavy with fruit. The towns of Sodom and Gomorrah sat in that valley, rich and busy, their markets full of goods from distant places. Lot did not look long. He looked at the green valley, and he looked at the dry hills where he stood, and he made his choice. He chose the Jordan Valley. It was a practical choice in its way. The land was better. The water was plentiful. His flocks would thrive there. His family would want for nothing. Anyone looking at that valley would have made the same choice. But there was something else in the valley too, something that Lot did not yet understand. The men of Sodom were known for their wickedness. Their city hummed with sin like a hive with bees. The grass grew green and the river ran sweet, and the people who lived there had turned their hearts away from God. Lot did not see that part. He saw only the green. He saw only the plenty. He packed his tents and moved his family down into the valley, and he pitched his tent near Sodom, and he took his place among the people who lived there. Abram watched him go. He did not hold Lot back. He did not argue with the choice. He simply let his nephew walk his own path, the way a father lets a son leave home, trusting that the road will teach what words cannot. Then Abram turned and went the other way. He moved his tents to the hills of Canaan, to a place called Hebron. The land there was rougher, the grass was thinner, the water did not run so free. But Abram built an altar to the Lord, and he worshipped there, and he waited. The separation was clean, the two families went their separate ways, and the strife ended. The herders stopped fighting, the animals spread out over more ground, and the land could breathe again. But the separation was also a loss. Abram had brought Lot out of Haran. He had carried the boy across the desert, protected him, taught him, watched him grow. Now the boy was gone, walking toward a city that would one day burn. Abram did not know that future. He only knew that his nephew was gone, and that the land felt emptier for it. But he had his flocks and his tents, and the promise of God still ringing in his ears, the promise of a great nation, the promise of a land that would one day belong to his descendants. He looked at the hills around him. They were bare and rocky. The sun beat down hard. But Abram had learned something in his journey from Haran. He had learned that God did not always lead through green valleys. Sometimes the road ran over stones. Sometimes the water ran thin. But the promise held, and the one who made it could be trusted. So Abram settled in Hebron. He built his altar. He called on the name of the Lord. And he waited for the next step of the journey, not knowing what it would be, but knowing who had called him. Lot, meanwhile, settled in the valley. He pitched his tent near Sodom, and the city drew him in. Its streets were busy, its markets were loud, its people were rich and full of life. Lot found work there and friends and a place in the community. He did not see the darkness beneath the bright surface. He did not hear the whispers of sin that filled the air like smoke. The valley was lush. The river ran through it, feeding the land, making everything grow. Lot's flocks flourished. His herds multiplied. He became a man of standing in the city, respected and known. But the city itself was sick. The wickedness of Sodom was not hidden. It rose from the streets like heat from a fire. The men of the city had given themselves over to evil, and their evil grew with each passing day. Lot saw it, some of it. He must have seen it. But he stayed. He had chosen the valley, and the valley held him fast. The green grass had a grip that was hard to break. And so the two men lived out their separate lives. Abram on the hills, worshiping God. Lot in the valley, watching the city grow darker around him. The line between them stretched thin, but it did not break. They were still family, still connected by blood and memory. The land had been too small for both of them. Now it was big enough. Abram had the hills, Lot had the valley. The strife was over, and the peace had come. But the story was not done. The valley that Lot had chosen would not stay peaceful for long. The kings of the region would march against each other. War would come to the cities of the plain. And Abram, the uncle who had let his nephew go, would one day march out to bring him home. That day was still ahead. For now, the two men settled into their separate lives, and the land stretched out between them, wide and quiet, waiting for what would come next. Abram rescues Lot. Time passed in the land of Canaan. Abram and Lot had gone their separate ways, each walking a different road under the same wide sky. The grass grew where their tents once stood side by side, and the memory of their parting settled into the quiet rhythm of days. Abram pitched his tent near the oaks of Mamre in the land of Hebron. There he built an altar to the Lord, as he had done in other places along his journey. The mornings came with the smell of dust and sheep, and the evenings brought the cool wind from the hills. His herds spread across the valleys, and his men grew in number. He was a man of peace, a wanderer who carried his home on his back, yet the land around him held its own troubles. To the east, in the green plain where Lot had chosen to dwell, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah stood with their walls and gates. They were rich cities, full of trade and noise, and Lot had moved his tents closer to them, until at last he lived within the walls of Sodom. The Jordan Valley fed his flocks, and the water was sweet. But the kings of that region did not live in peace. 4 kings ruled in the east. Amraphel was king of Shinar, Arioch was king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer was king of Elam, and Tidal was king of Goiim. For 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, paying him tribute and bending their necks to his will. But in the 13th year, the kings of the valley grew tired of the wait. The king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which men called Zoar, joined their hands and refused to pay. They lifted their heads and stood against the eastern power. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer came with his allies. They marched with chariots and spears, with foot soldiers kicking up dust along the ancient roads. They struck first at the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Shava Kiriathaim. Then they turned against the Horites in the hill country of Seir, pushing as far as El Paran near the wilderness. These were old peoples, tribes who had lived in those lands since before memory. The eastern kings crushed them like dry clay. Then they swung back. They came to En Mishpat, which men called Kadesh, and they laid waste to the fields of the Amalekites. They struck down the Amorites who lived in Hazazon Tamar. The land groaned under their march, and the smoke of burning villages rose behind them like a long gray curtain. Now the kings of the valley came out to meet them, the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela drew up their forces in the valley of Siddim. That valley was full of tar pits, dark and sticky, where the ground swallowed the unwary. The 2 armies met, and the battle was swift. The eastern kings had the greater strength, and the valley kings broke before them like reeds in a storm. The men of Sodom fled. Some ran toward the hills, and some fell where they stood. The tar pits caught many who tried to escape, pulling them down into the black earth. Those who survived ran to the mountains, leaving their cities open and their people behind. The eastern kings walked into Sodom and Gomorrah. They took everything: the grain from the storehouses, the silver from the treasury, the fine cloth from the looms. They gathered the people too, men, women, and children, and bound them with ropes. Among those taken was Lot, the son of Abram's brother. He had been living in Sodom, and so he shared its fate. The soldiers drove the captives along the road, northward, away from the smoking ruins. A man escaped. He ran through the night, his breath ragged, his feet torn. He made his way to the oaks of Mamre, where Abram lived among his tents. He found Abram and told him what had happened. The words came out in pieces between gasps. The battle, the defeat, the king of Sodom fallen, the city taken, Lot carried off with the rest. Abram heard the news and did not hesitate. He had with him men who had been born in his household, trained and loyal. 318 of them, men who knew how to follow and how to fight. Abram called them together. He also sent word to his allies, men who had made a pact with him in the land of Mamre. These were Honor, Eshcol, and Mamre themselves, brothers who had sworn friendship with Abram. They came with their own fighters, and the small force gathered under the night sky. They moved quickly. Abram led them north, following the trail of the eastern kings. The road was long and hard, but Abram kept the pace. He did not stop to rest more than needed. He knew that each hour brought the captives farther away, and each mile made the rescue harder. They caught up with the eastern kings at Dan. The army was camped there, heavy with plunder and prisoners. They did not expect an attack. They were far from home, and the land behind them seemed safe. The captives were tied together in groups, and the soldiers were resting after their long march. Abram did not wait. He divided his men into companies and planned the strike. He chose the night, when the darkness would hide their numbers, and the confusion would work in their favor. When the camp settled into sleep, Abram's men moved in. They came from more than one side, striking where the guards were few. The sound of shouting rose into the night. The eastern soldiers woke to chaos, grabbing for weapons that were not within reach. Abram's men moved through the camp with purpose, cutting the ropes that held the prisoners and driving the enemy before them. The battle did not last long. The eastern kings fled into the darkness, their army broken and scattered. They left behind their tents and their plunder, and they ran for their lives. Abram's men pursued them for a while, pushing them far beyond the camp until there was no question of them turning back. Then Abram turned to the captives. He found Lot alive, shaken but whole. He gathered the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he gathered the goods that had been taken. Everything was brought back, the silver, the grain, the cloth, the animals. Nothing was left behind. The women and children were freed from their ropes, and the long column began the journey home. They came back to the valley of Shava, which men called the King's Valley. Word of the rescue had spread, and the king of Sodom came out to meet Abram. He was a humbled man, his city in ruins, his people returned to him. He stood before Abram and spoke. "Give me the people," he said. "Keep the goods for yourself." It was a generous offer, a way to thank the man who had saved everything. But Abram had his own thoughts. He had made a promise to the Lord, the Most High God, and he did not want the wealth of Sodom to pass through his hands. He looked at the king and shook his head. "I have raised my hand to the Lord, the Most High, the maker of heaven and earth," Abram said. "I will take nothing from you, not a thread, not a sandal strap. You will not be able to say that you made Abram rich. Only what my young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion." The king of Sodom had no answer. He stepped back and the matter was settled. Then another figure came forward. He was Melchizedek, king of Salem. He was also a priest of the Most High God. He brought bread and wine, and he blessed Abram. His voice carried the weight of old words, and his presence seemed to hold a quiet power. "Blessed be Abram by the Most High God," Melchizedek said, "maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Abram received the blessing. He gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything he had taken. It was a simple act, a gift of honor. The king of Salem accepted it, and the two men stood together in the valley, surrounded by the returning people in the quiet hills. The sun moved toward the west, and the shadows grew long. The captives were free, and the goods were restored. Lot stood among the crowd, his face pale but his eyes clear. He had been pulled from the fire, and now he would go back to the ruins of his city to begin again. Abram watched him go. The road between them was long now, but it was not a road of anger. It was just the way things were. Two men, called by the same God, walking different paths under the same sky. The night came, and the camp grew quiet. Abram sat by his tent, the smell of the earth around him. The stars came out one by one, and he looked up at them, as he often did. The promise was still there, waiting in the dark. He did not know when it would come to pass, but he knew it would. The land around him held the names of kings and the ruins of cities, but the God who made the heavens and the earth held something greater. Abram rested in that thought, and the night passed in peace. God's covenant with Abram. The sun rose over the valley, casting long shadows across the land where Abram had made his home. The days of battle had passed, and the camp had returned to its quiet rhythm. Yet something stirred in Abram's heart, a restlessness that would not settle. He had seen the power of kings and armies, had watched them rise and fall like waves upon the shore. But what did any of it mean in the end? It was in the quiet of the evening, when the fires burned low and the stars began to appear, that the voice came to Abram once more. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Abram looked up at the heavens, the counterpoints of light scattered across the dark like seeds thrown upon a field. He thought of his empty tent, of the years that had passed, of the promise that seemed so distant now, and he spoke the words that had been weighing on his heart. "O Lord God, what can you give me? I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my household is Eliezer of Damascus." There was no anger in his voice, only a deep and honest sorrow. He had left his homeland, had walked by faith through unknown lands, had trusted in a promise that seemed to grow more impossible with each passing year. And still there was no son, no heir, no one to carry his name into the future. The voice answered him with words that would echo through all the ages. "Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be." Abram stood in the darkness, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse above him. The stars stretched beyond his vision, further than his mind could reach. They shimmered and pulsed with a light that seemed alive, each one a tiny flame in the great tapestry of the night. And in that moment, something shifted within him. Not a sudden flash of understanding, but a quiet settling, like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a stream. He believed. It was not a belief born of proof or evidence. It was not a belief that came from seeing the promise fulfilled. It was a belief that came from knowing the one who had made the promise. Abram had walked with this God through famine and battle, through parting and wandering, through moments of doubt and seasons of waiting. And though he could not see the way ahead, he knew the one who led him there. The voice spoke again, and this time it carried the weight of a declaration. I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. Abram bowed his head. He had heard these words before, had carried them like a seed in his pocket, waiting for the right season to plant them. But now they felt different, more solid, more real. How can I know that I will gain possession of it? It was not a question of doubt. It was a question of longing. Abram wanted to hold on to something, to have a sign he could touch and remember. He wanted the promise to become more than words, more than hope. He wanted it to take root in the earth beneath his feet. The Lord answered him with a ritual that was ancient even in those days. He told Abram to bring a heifer, a goat, a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought them all, cut the animals in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds he did not cut. Then he waited. As the sun began to set, a deep sleep fell over Abram. Thick and heavy, it wrapped around him like a blanket, and in the midst of that darkness, a terror gripped his soul. It was not the fear of an enemy or the dread of a coming storm. It was something deeper, something that touched the very core of his being. It was the fear of the unknown, of the long road ahead, of the generations that would come after him, and the trials they would face. And in that darkness, the voice spoke of things to come. It spoke of a sojourn in a foreign land, of slavery and oppression, of 400 years of waiting. But it also spoke of deliverance, of judgment upon the oppressors, of a return to this very land with great possessions. Abram heard the words, but could not fully grasp them. They were like pieces of a story he would never live to see, a story that would unfold long after his bones had turned to dust. And yet, there was comfort in them. There was a promise that the waiting would not be forever, that the night would not last, that the dawn would come. When the sun had fully set and the darkness had settled over the land, something remarkable happened. A smoking fire pot and a blazing torch appeared, passing between the pieces of the animals. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if walking a path that had been prepared for them. And in that moment, Abram understood. This was not a promise between equals. This was not a negotiation or a bargain struck between two parties. This was a covenant, a binding oath, a solemn commitment that God was making with him. And unlike the covenants of men, this one did not depend on Abram's faithfulness. It depended entirely on God's. The voice spoke the words that sealed the promise. To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. Abram stood in the darkness, watching the last traces of the fire fade into the night. The land stretched out before him, vast and silent. He could not see it, not with his eyes, but he could see it with his heart. He could see the generations that would come, the people who would call this place home, the story that would unfold across the centuries. He thought of the stars again, of the countless lights that filled the sky. Each one seemed to hold a promise, a life, a future. And in that moment, Abram knew that he was part of something much larger than himself. He was a thread in a tapestry, a note in a song, a step in a journey that would never end. The days that followed were quiet ones. Abram returned to his daily routines, tending to his flocks, overseeing his household, greeting the travelers who passed through his camp. But something had changed within him. The restlessness had settled, replaced by a deep and abiding peace. He carried the promise with him now, not as a distant hope, but as a present reality. He was old, and his body showed the signs of his years. His hair had grayed, his step had slowed, and the strength of his youth had faded. But his spirit was young, alive with the certainty of what God had spoken. He walked through the land of Canaan, his land, and he knew that one day his descendants would do the same. The covenant was sealed. The promise was made. And though the waiting would continue, though the years would stretch on and the fulfillment would seem distant, Abram knew that the words spoken on that starry night would never fade. They were written not on stone or parchment, but on the very fabric of creation itself. He was Abram, the father of many nations. He was a man who had believed, and his belief had become the foundation of something beyond his imagining. The stars above him whispered of a future he would never see, but he trusted the one who had placed them there. The fire had passed between the pieces. The covenant was made, and Abram rested in the certainty of a promise that would outlast the heavens themselves. Hagar and Ishmael, the promise had been spoken under a starry sky, and the covenant had been sealed with blood and fire. Abram had believed, and God had counted it to him as righteousness. The words hung in the air like smoke from the altar, sweet and certain. But the years passed, and the silence grew louder with each turning season. The dust of Canaan settled on Abram's tent, and Sarai carried a weight that no amount of waiting could lift. She watched the women of the nearby villages. They carried children on their hips, their laughter mixing with the cries of little ones. Sarai turned away each time, but the ache remained. She had been beautiful once, sought after, taken into palaces. Now her beauty was a memory, and her womb was a tomb. The promise of a great nation seemed to mock her with every empty embrace. Her thoughts moved like a restless wind. Perhaps the fault lay with her. Perhaps the God who had spoken to Abram had not accounted for her barrenness. The law of the land offered a path, one that many women had walked before her. A servant could bear the child. The child would belong to the mistress. It was not an uncommon thing. It was not a shameful thing. It was simply the way of the world. Sarai stood at the entrance of her tent, watching Hagar draw water from the well. The Egyptian girl moved with a grace that Sarai had once known. Her arms were strong, her back straight, her youth a quiet presence. Sarai called her over, and the words came out before she could stop them. "Go to my husband," she said. "Lie with him. Perhaps through you I may build a family." Hagar's eyes widened, but she did not speak. She lowered her head and nodded, a servant's obedience masking whatever she felt. Sarai turned away, her chest tight with a mixture of hope and something she refused to name. When Abram returned that evening, Sarai told him what she had done. He looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. He had heard the voice of God, had seen the stars and believed, but the waiting had worn grooves into his faith, and the voice had been quiet for so long. Perhaps this was the way. Perhaps the promise would come through another path, and God would still be faithful. He agreed. Hagar came to Abram's tent that night, her footsteps soft on the woven mats. She was young, and she was afraid, but she did not show it. She did what was asked of her, and in the weeks that followed, her body began to change. The sickness came in the mornings and the tiredness in the afternoons. She knew before anyone told her. The child was growing inside her, and with the child came a shift in her bearing. She walked differently now. She held her head higher. The deference she had shown Sarai began to crack like dry earth under the first rain of the season. She was carrying Abram's son. She was the mother of the heir. Perhaps she wondered what Sarai was, with her empty arms and her faded beauty. The tension built slowly, like heat before a storm. Sarai noticed the change in Hagar's eyes, the slight curl of her lip when she was given orders. The servant no longer moved with the same haste. She took her time. She made Sarai repeat herself. And when Sarai spoke of the child, Hagar would place a hand on her belly and smile in a way that cut deeper than any blade. Sarai's anger grew until it filled her chest like a flood. She could not bear the sight of the girl, yet she could not send her away, not with the child growing inside her. So she did what she had always done. She went to Abram. "This is your doing," she said, her voice sharp as broken pottery. "I gave my servant into your arms, and now she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Abram looked at her, weary and torn. He had loved her once, had crossed deserts for her, had lied for her, had waited with her through the long years of silence. But he could not undo what had been done. He could not unmake the child. He could only give the authority back to her. "She is your servant," he said. "Do with her as you please." Sarai's anger found its target. She dealt harshly with Hagar, giving her the hardest tasks, the longest hours, the sharpest words. She did not strike her, but the cruelty of her tongue was its own kind of wound. Day after day, she reminded Hagar of her place, of her origin, of the debt she owed. And Hagar broke. She fled into the wilderness, her sandals kicking up dust along the road to Shur. The sun beat down on her, and the child kicked inside her, and she had no water, no food, no destination. She walked until her legs gave out, then sat beside a spring of water, her tears mixing with the dirt on her face. The angel of the Lord found her there. He spoke her name, and she looked up, startled. No one had called her by name in days. She was just the servant, the Egyptian, the one who had caused trouble. Hagar, servant of Sarai, the angel said, "Where have you come from, and where are you going?" Her voice was small when she answered, "I am fleeing from my mistress." The angel did not scold her. He did not tell her to be strong or to endure. He spoke to her with a gentleness that she had not known since she was a child in her mother's house. "Return to your mistress," he said. "Submit to her authority. I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too many to count." He gave her more words, words she did not fully understand but felt in her bones. A son, a name, Ishmael, meaning God hears, because the Lord had heard her misery, heard her weeping by the spring. And the boy would be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, living in hostility toward all his brothers. Hagar rose from the ground, her strength returning. She looked at the spring beside her and gave it a name. Bir Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. She had been seen, she had been heard, she was not alone. She returned to Sarai, her head bowed, her steps slow but steady. The submission was bitter, but it was obedience. And in the months that followed, she carried her burden in silence, waiting for the child who would change everything. When the time came, Ishmael was born. Abram named him as the angel had commanded, and the sound of the name filled the tent with meaning. God hears. God had heard the cry of a servant girl in the wilderness, and God had heard the longing of an old man who had waited decades for a son. Abram was 86 years old. He held the boy in his arms, and the child's fingers curled around his own, tiny and fragile and alive. Sarai watched from the doorway, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. The child was not hers. The promise had been fulfilled through another. But the child was here, and he was breathing, and he was part of the family. For a time, there was peace. The tension between Sarai and Hagar softened into an uneasy truce. The boy grew, and his laughter filled the camp, and Abram's heart swelled with a love he had not known he was capable of. The waiting had ended. The silence had been broken. But beneath the surface, the seeds of a deeper sorrow were already taking root. Sarai still had no child of her own. The ache had not left her. It had only been buried under the weight of daily life. And in the quiet of the night, when the camp was still and the stars burned overhead, she would lie awake and wonder if the God who had promised her a nation had forgotten her name. Sodom and Gomorrah. The dust of the road still clung to Abraham's feet when the visitors came. He sat at the entrance of his tent, the heat of the day softening the edges of the world. 3 strangers appeared, standing in the shade of the terebinth trees. Abraham rose quickly. He bowed low, pressing his forehead to the warm earth. "My lord," he said, "if I have found favor in your eyes, do not pass by your servant." He hurried to Sarah. "Quick," he said, 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, make bread." Then he ran to the herd. He chose a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a servant. The meat was prepared, and Abraham brought it before the visitors. He stood near them while they ate under the tree, the afternoon light falling soft on the grass. They asked about Sarah. She was inside the tent, listening. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" they asked. "In the tent," Abraham said. The visitor spoke again. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Sarah laughed, not out loud, but in her heart. She was old. Abraham was old. Her body had long passed the season of such things, but the visitor knew. "Why did Sarah laugh?" he asked. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah was afraid. "I did not laugh," she said. But he said, "No, but you did laugh." The men rose to leave. They looked toward Sodom, where the plain lay green and open, watered like the garden of the Lord. Abraham walked with them to send them on their way. The Lord spoke, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord. Then the Lord told him, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was great. Their sin was heavy, too heavy to bear. The Lord had come down to see for himself whether it was truly as the outcry suggested. The two visitors turned and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord. Abraham drew close. His voice was careful, humble, but it did not tremble. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham spoke again. His voice was quieter now. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city because of 5 people? If I find 45 there, the Lord said, I will not destroy it. Abraham pressed on. What if only 40 are found there? For the sake of 40, I will not do it. Please, Lord, do not be angry. Let me speak. What if 30 are found there? For the sake of 30, I will not do it. Now that I have dared to speak to the Lord, Abraham said, what if 20 are found there? For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Abraham's voice was thin now, like a thread about to break. Do not be angry, my Lord. Let me speak one more time. What if 10 are found there? For the sake of 10, the Lord said, I will not destroy it. The Lord finished speaking. He went his way. Abraham turned and walked back to his tent, the weight of the conversation pressing on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. The two visitors reached Sodom in the evening. Lot sat in the gateway of the city, where men gathered to judge and to trade. He saw them and rose to meet them. He bowed low, his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. Spend the night, wash your feet, then you can rise early and go on your way. The visitors said, no, we will spend the night in the square. But Lot insisted. He pressed them until they agreed. They went to his house, and he prepared a meal for them. He baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they could lie down to rest, the men of the city surrounded the house. Young and old, from every corner of Sodom, they came. They called out to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us. Lot went outside. He closed the door behind him and faced the crowd. No, my brothers, he said, do not do this wicked thing. But the crowd pressed forward. Stand back, they shouted. This man came to live as a foreigner, and now he wants to judge us? We will treat you worse than them. They surged against the door. Lot's visitors reached out and pulled him back inside. They shut the door. Then the visitors struck the men at the doorway with blindness. Young and old alike groped at the air, unable to find the door. Their hands searched the walls, the posts, the ground. They stumbled away, cursing in the dark. The visitors spoke to Lot. Do you have anyone else here? Sons, daughters, sons-in-law? Get them out of this place. We are going to destroy it. The outcry against this city has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it. Lot went to his sons-in-law, the men engaged to his daughters. Hurry, he said. Get up and leave this place. The Lord is about to destroy the city. But they thought he was joking. They laughed. They waved him away. They did not move. Morning came, pale and gray. The visitors urged Lot, hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters. Run, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. Lot hesitated. He stood in his doorway, looking at the house he had built, the goods he had gathered, the life he had made. His feet would not move, so the visitors took his hand. They took his wife's hand. They took his daughter's hands. The Lord was merciful to them. They led them out of the city and set them outside its walls. Run for your lives, the visitors said. Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be destroyed. Please, my lords, Lot said. You have been so kind to your servant, but I cannot flee to the mountains. Disaster would overtake me, and I would die. Look, there is a town near enough to run to. It is small. Let me flee there. Please let me go to that small town. The visitor said, very well. I will grant this request also. I will not overthrow the town you speak of. But hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you reach it. So Lot ran. His wife ran beside him. His daughters ran behind them. The sun rose over the plain, and they ran toward the small town called Zoar. The sun was fully up when Lot reached Zoar. He stumbled into the town, gasping for breath, his lungs burning. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. Fire fell from heaven, from the Lord himself. The cities burned. The whole plain burned. All the towns, all the people, all the green fields that had looked so promising from a distance. The smoke rose like the smoke of a furnace, thick and dark, filling the sky. Lot's wife looked back. She had been told not to. The warning was clear. The command was simple, but she heard the sound of the fire. She felt the heat on her neck. She turned her head just for a moment to see what was behind her. She became a pillar of salt, still and silent, standing in the plain, facing what she had left behind. Abraham rose early that morning. He went to the place where he had stood before the Lord the day before. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward the whole plain. He saw smoke rising from the earth. Like the smoke of a furnace, it climbed into the sky. The cities were gone. The green valley was gone. Everything was ash and ruin. Abraham stood there for a long time. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. Lot was afraid to stay in Zoar. The town was too close to the destruction. He took his 2 daughters and left, climbing into the mountains. They found a cave and lived there. The older daughter spoke to the younger. "Our father is old. There is no man anywhere on earth to come to us the way people do everywhere. Come, let us get our father to drink wine. Then we can lie with him and preserve our family line." They made their father drink wine that night. The older daughter went in and lay with him. He did not know when she came in or when she left. The next day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Last night I lay with my father. Let us get him to drink wine again tonight. Then you go in and lie with him." So they made their father drink wine again that night. The younger daughter went in and lay with him. He did not know when she came in or when she left. Both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The older daughter gave birth to a son and named him Moab. He became the father of the Moabites. The younger daughter also gave birth to a son and named him Ben-Ammi. He became the father of the Ammonites. Abraham returned to his life. He moved south, settling between Kadesh and Shur. He stayed for a while in Gerar, a quiet place with wells and grazing land. The memory of the smoke on the horizon faded slowly, like all memories do. Sarah was with him. The promise still stood, waiting for its time to unfold. The birth of Isaac. The smoke of Sodom and Gomorrah still hung in the distant air when Abraham returned to his tents. He had seen the judgment fall. He had watched the fire come down like a curtain closing on a stage. And now he walked back to the place where Sarah waited, his heart heavy with what he had witnessed. The days passed in quiet routine. The flocks moved across the hills, the servants tended their duties, and Abraham carried within him a quiet ache that had grown familiar over the years. The promise, the long wait, the silence that seemed to stretch on without end. Sarah felt it too. She had felt it for decades. Every spring that came and went, every new tent pitched in a new land, every passing year that wrote itself upon her face. She had stopped counting the seasons long ago. She had stopped hoping in the way she once had. But God had not stopped remembering. It came on a warm afternoon, the kind of afternoon that seemed ordinary in every way. Abraham sat in the shade of his tent, watching the light play across the dust, and then, like a whisper that carried the weight of mountains, the words came again. The visitor spoke of Sarah, of a son, of a time that was coming. Sarah, hidden behind the tent flap, laughed, not with joy, not with hope, with the hollow sound of a woman who had buried her dreams so deep that she had forgotten where she had laid them. She was old. He was old. The fire of youth had long since cooled to ash, but the visitor heard her laugh, and he asked a question that hung in the air like a bell that had not yet finished ringing. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" The question settled over them like dust. Sarah denied it, of course. She said she had not laughed, but the visitor knew, and Abraham knew. And somewhere in the quiet space between fear and faith, something shifted. The seasons turned. The rains came and went. The flocks grew and scattered and grew again. And then, in the time that God had spoken of, in the season that had been appointed before the foundations of the earth, it happened. Sarah conceived. The news moved through the camp like a ripple across still water. The servants whispered, the herdsmen exchanged glances. The women who had tended Sarah for years could hardly believe what they were seeing. But there it was, the curve of her belly, the glow on her face, the life growing where life had long been counted impossible. Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah was 90. Every natural explanation had failed. Every human expectation had been overturned. And yet there she was, carrying the promise made flesh. The months passed slowly, each one a miracle stretched out over weeks and days. Sarah moved carefully through the camp, her hand resting on her belly, her eyes holding a light that had not been there for years. She laughed often now, not the hollow laugh of despair, something different, something that caught in her throat and came out like music. She remembered the visitor's words, she remembered her own doubt, and she marveled at the way God had taken her unbelief and woven it into the story anyway. The birth came in the spring when the hills were green and the lambs were new. The women gathered around Sarah's tent. The cries of labor filled the air, and then, cutting through it all, the first cry of a newborn child. A boy. They placed him in Sarah's arms, and she looked down at him with a wonder that words cannot carry. Here was the son of her old age. Here was the child of promise. Here was everything she had stopped hoping for, wrapped in soft cloth and breathing against her chest. She named him Isaac. Laughter, because that was what he brought. That was what he was. A laugh that had been buried for years, suddenly unearthed and given breath and bone and life. Abraham came to the tent and looked at his son. 100 years of waiting had led to this moment. Every false start, every doubt, every night spent staring at the stars and wondering if the promise would ever come. And now here was the answer. Small and wrinkled and perfect. The camp celebrated. Word spread through the servants and the shepherds. The son of Abraham had been born. The promise had come to pass. The impossible had happened. On the 8th day, Abraham circumcised his son just as God had commanded. The covenant was sealed in flesh and blood. The line would continue. The promise would carry forward into the next generation. And Sarah, holding Isaac close, laughed again. But this time, the laughter was different. This time it was full and free and unafraid. God has brought me laughter, she said. Everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. She looked at the child in her arms. She thought of all the years she had spent waiting, all the nights she had wondered if God had forgotten, all the moments she had doubted and questioned and wept. And now this, a child, a son, a miracle wrapped in her arms. The days that followed were filled with the ordinary rhythms of life. Isaac grew. He nursed and slept and cried and smiled. Abraham watched him with eyes that had seen too much and now saw everything fresh. Sarah tended him with hands that had grown tired over the years, but now found new strength. The household changed. The silence that had hung over the camp for so long lifted. There was laughter now, real laughter, the kind that echoes through the hills and settles into the bones. Abraham held his son one evening as the sun sank low over the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of gold and rose. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and dust. He thought of the journey that had brought him here, the call that had come so many years ago. The leaving of his homeland, the wandering through strange lands, the battles and the fears and the moments when he had wondered if he had heard God correctly. And now this, a child who would carry the promise forward, a son who would grow and learn and walk the same dusty roads that Abraham had walked. A laughter that would echo through the generations. Sarah joined him in the tent entrance. She looked at her husband and her son, and something in her face softened. The lines that years had carved there seemed to ease. The weariness that had marked her features lifted. Isaac, she said softly, speaking his name like a prayer. Abraham nodded. The name was right. It was perfect. It was everything. The night settled over the camp. The stars came out, one by one, until the sky was thick with them. Abraham looked up at the countless lights and remembered the promise God had made. Descendants like the stars, descendants like the sand on the seashore, and now, holding his son, he understood a little more. The promise was not just about numbers. It was about this, a child in his arms, a child in his arms, a future in his hands, a laugh that would never be silenced. The days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. Isaac grew strong and healthy. He learned to crawl and then to walk. He spoke his first words and took his first steps into the wide world. Sarah watched him with joy that never dimmed. Every moment was a gift. Every laugh was a treasure. She had waited so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be surprised by joy. Now she was learning again. Abraham taught Isaac about the land. He showed him the wells his servants had dug, the fields where the flocks grazed, the hills where he had built altars to the God who had called him. And as the child grew, the promise grew with him. The covenant that God had made with Abraham would pass to Isaac. The land that had been promised would one day be his. The blessing that had been spoken would continue through his line. The story was not over. It was just beginning. The testing of Abraham. The joy of Isaac's birth had filled the tent with laughter. Sarah had held the child close, her old eyes bright with wonder. Abraham had looked upon his son and seen the promise of countless generations. The laughter had echoed through the camp, a sound of pure delight. But time passed, as time does. The boy grew from a babe to a child with curious eyes and quick feet. He followed his father through the camp, asking questions about the stars and the sheep and the wide world beyond the hills. Abraham answered each question with patience, his heart full. Then came the test. The voice came to Abraham in the quiet of the night, clear as a bell on still air. The voice that had called him from Ur, had led him through strange lands, had promised him a son. Now that same voice spoke again. Abraham. He knew the voice. He rose from his rest and stood in the cool darkness. Here I am. Take your son, the voice said. Your only son, the one you love. Go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. The words hung in the air like stones. Abraham stood still. His breath came slow. His heart beat steady, though a cold weight settled in his chest. This made no sense. This could not be. The promise had come through Isaac. Every hope, every dream, every covenant rested on the boy. But the voice had spoken. Abraham did not argue. He did not bargain as he had for Sodom. He did not ask why. The voice had spoken, and he would obey. This was the way of it. The voice had never led him wrong. Morning came with pale light across the hills. Abraham rose early. He cut wood for the burnt offering and loaded it onto the donkey. He spoke to two young servants, told them to prepare for a journey. Then he went to Isaac. The boy was awake, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His dark hair stuck up in odd directions. He looked at his father with trust and curiosity. "Father, where are we going?" "To worship," Abraham said. "We will offer a sacrifice." Isaac nodded, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. He had seen many sacrifices. He knew the rituals. He climbed onto the donkey, and they set out. The road stretched before them. Abraham walked beside the donkey, his hand resting on the animal's flank. The wood was strapped to its back, along with supplies for the journey. The two servants followed at a distance. They traveled for 3 days. During those days, Abraham spoke little. He watched his son ride ahead, watched the boy's small back sway with the donkey's steps. He watched the sun rise and set. He watched the stars come out at night, the same stars that had been promised to him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the mountain in the distance. It rose from the land like a question mark against the sky, a place of bare rock and scrub brush, nothing special to look at. But he knew. This was the place. He stopped the donkey and turned to the servants. "Stay here with the donkey," he said. "The boy and I will go up there to worship. We will come back to you." The servants nodded. They began to set up a small camp. Abraham unloaded the wood from the donkey. He placed it on Isaac's back, the way a man carries his own burden. He took the fire and the knife for himself. Then he began to climb. Isaac walked beside him, the wood heavy on his young shoulders. The path was steep and rocky. They climbed in silence for a while, their breath coming in short puffs. Then Isaac spoke, "Father." Abraham turned to look at him. The boy's face was flushed from the climb. His eyes were wide and questioning. "Yes, my son?" "We have the fire and the wood," Isaac said. "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham looked at his son. He looked at the fire in his own hand, the knife at his belt. He looked at the mountain rising above them, and he said, "God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." Isaac seemed satisfied with this answer. He nodded and continued climbing. Abraham followed, his eyes fixed on the ground before him. They reached the top of the mountain. The wind blew across the bare rock. Abraham could see for miles in every direction. The land stretched out below them, a patchwork of green and brown and gray. The sky was wide and empty. Abraham built an altar. He stacked the stones with careful hands, each one placed with precision. He arranged the wood on top, the way he had done 100 times before. The motions were familiar, comforting in their repetition. Then he turned to his son. Isaac stood waiting, watching his father work. He did not understand. Not yet. He trusted his father the way a child trusts the ground beneath their feet. "Come here, my son," Abraham said. Isaac walked to him. Abraham took the boy's hands. They were small and warm. "My son," Abraham said, "God has asked something of me, something I do not fully understand." Isaac looked up at him, waiting. "He has asked me to give you to him," Abraham said, "to offer you as the sacrifice." Isaac's face went pale. His eyes grew wide. But he did not run. He did not cry out. He stood still, trembling slightly. "You are the one God promised me," Abraham said. "You are the one through whom all nations will be blessed. I do not know how this can be, but God has spoken, and I must obey." Isaac was silent for a long moment. The wind moved between them. "Father," he said, "if this is what God has asked, then do what you must." Abraham closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. He opened his eyes and looked at his son, this boy who had come to him in old age, this miracle of laughter and light. He bound the boy's hands with rope, gentle but firm. He laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Isaac lay still, his eyes fixed on the sky above. Abraham raised the knife. The sun caught the blade, flashing bright. His hand trembled. His arm ached with the weight of it. His son lay before him, breathing slow and steady. This was the moment, the test. Everything he had believed, everything he had hoped, everything he had trusted, it all came down to this single act. He thought of the voice that had called him from Ur. He thought of the promise of countless descendants. He thought of Sarah's laughter when the angel told her she would bear a child. He thought of Isaac's first steps, his first words, his small hand in Abraham's own. And yet, the voice had spoken. The voice had never failed him. He brought the knife down. "Abraham! Abraham!" The voice rang out across the mountain, sharp as a bell. Abraham stopped. The knife hung frozen in the air. "Here I am," he said. "Do not lay your hand on the boy," the voice said. "Do not do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham lowered the knife. His hands shook. His breath came ragged. He looked at his son, still bound on the altar, and tears fell freely from his eyes. He heard a rustling in the thicket behind him. He turned and saw a ram caught by its horns in the bushes. The animal struggled against its captivity, its eyes wild with fear. Abraham walked to the ram. He untangled it from the brush and carried it back to the altar. He released his son from the ropes and helped him stand. "God has provided," Abraham said, "as I told you." Isaac stood on shaky legs. He looked at the ram, then at his father, then at the sky above. His eyes were wet, but he did not weep. Abraham took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. The fire consumed it, sending smoke rising into the blue sky. The smell of burning meat filled the air. The voice spoke again, gentle now, like a hand on a shoulder. "I swear by myself," declares the Lord, "that because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." Abraham stood on the mountain with his son beside him. The smoke of the offering rose toward heaven. The wind blew across the rock, and for a moment everything was still. He looked at Isaac. The boy's face was pale but calm. There was something new in his eyes, a depth that had not been there before, a knowledge of what it meant to be chosen. "Come," Abraham said, "let us go back down." They walked down the mountain together, father and son. The servants saw them coming and rose to meet them. Abraham saw the question in their eyes and simply said, "God provided." They returned to their camp, to their life, to the long road of days. The laughter came back after a time, but something had changed. Something had been tested and found strong. Abraham knew now. His faith was not a thing of words or promises. It was a thing of action, of trust, of laying down what he loved most and trusting that God would be faithful. And God had been faithful. He had provided the ram, he had spared the son, he had kept every promise and would keep the ones still to come. The boy grew. The years passed. The stars remained in the sky, countless as the sand, bright as the promises spoken on that mountain. Abraham carried the memory of that day like a stone in his pocket. He touched it often, not with fear, but with wonder. He had been tested, he had been found faithful, and the voice had spoken once again with love. Isaac and Rebekah. The mountain stood quiet behind them. Abraham and his son had walked down together, and the ram's ashes were still warm on the stone. But the father knew his work was not finished. The promise needed a future. Isaac needed a wife. Abraham was old now, heavy with years and wisdom. He called his most trusted servant, the one who managed all his household, and made him swear a solemn oath. The servant placed his hand under Abraham's thigh, as was the custom in those days, and listened. "You must go to my homeland," Abraham said, "to the land of my people. Find a wife for Isaac there. Do not take a woman from the Canaanites, for they do not know our God. And do not bring my son back to that land. The Lord promised this land to my offspring, and Isaac must not leave it." The servant asked, "What if the woman will not come with me? Should I take Isaac there?" Abraham's voice was firm. "The Lord will send his angel before you. If she will not come, then you are free from this oath. But never take my son back there." So the servant prepared for the journey. He loaded 10 camels with gifts, treasures from Abraham's household, and set out toward the region of Aram Naharaim, the land between the rivers. The road was long and dusty, and the servant's heart was heavy with the weight of his task. He arrived at the town of Nahor as evening fell. The women of the city were coming out to draw water from the well, carrying their jars upon their shoulders. The servant made his camels kneel beside the well and prayed. "Lord, God of my master Abraham," he said, "grant me success today. I stand here by this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. Let it be that when I ask a young woman for a drink, she will say, 'Drink, and I will water your camels too.' Let that be the one you have chosen for Isaac. By this I will know." He had barely finished speaking when a young woman came out with a jar on her shoulder. She was beautiful, with a face that held both gentleness and strength. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came back up. The servant ran to meet her. "Please let me drink a little water from your jar." She lowered the jar from her shoulder and held it for him. "Drink, my lord." And when he had finished, she said, "I will draw water for your camels as well until they have finished drinking." She hurried back to the well and poured again and again until all 10 camels had drunk their fill. The servant watched in silence, wondering whether the Lord had answered his prayer. He brought out a gold nose ring and 2 gold bracelets and gave them to her. "Whose daughter are you?" he asked. "And is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She answered, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah and Nahor. We have plenty of straw and fodder and room to spend the night." The servant bowed his head and worshipped the Lord. "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness. He has led me on the right path to the house of my master's relatives." The young woman ran home and told her family all that had happened. Her brother Laban saw the gold ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms and hurried out to the well. "Come in, you who are blessed by the Lord," he said. "Why do you stand out here? I have prepared the house and a place for the camels." So the servant entered the house. They brought water to wash his feet and the feet of the men with him. Food was set before him, but he said, "I will not eat until I have told you my mission." "Speak," Laban said. The servant began, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master greatly, and he has become wealthy. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, servants and camels and donkeys. My master's wife Sarah bore him a son in her old age, and he has given everything he owns to that son. He made me swear an oath and sent me here to find a wife for his son from his own clan. I prayed to the Lord, and before I finished speaking, Rebekah came out with her jar. I asked for a drink, and she gave me water and watered my camels. I asked whose daughter she was, and she told me. Now if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me so. If not, tell me, so I may know what to do." Laban and Bethuel answered together, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you, either good or bad. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go. Let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed." When the servant heard this, he bowed low before the Lord. He brought out silver and gold jewelry and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and her mother. Then they ate and drank, and the servant and his men spent the night. In the morning the servant said, "Send me on my way so I can return to my master." But Rebekah's brother and mother said, "Let her stay with us 10 days or so. Then she may go." The servant replied, "Do not delay me. The Lord has granted me success. Send me on my way." They called Rebekah and asked, "Will you go with this man?" She said, "I will go." So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse and Abraham's servant and his men. As she left, they blessed her. "Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gates of their enemies." Rebekah and her maids mounted the camels and followed the servant. The road stretched long before them, through dry valleys and open plains, under the same stars that had guided Abraham so many years before. Now Isaac had come from the region of Beer Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me, and was living in the Negev. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Isaac went out to the field to meditate. He looked up and saw camels approaching in the distance. Rebekah also looked up from her camel and saw a man walking in the field. She slipped down from her mount and asked the servant, "Who is that man walking toward us?" The servant said, "That is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac everything that had happened, how the Lord had led him to Rebekah, and how her family had agreed. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah. He took Rebekah as his wife, and he loved her. In her he found comfort after the grief of losing his mother. The tent that had stood empty now held new life, new hope. The promise continued. The family grew by one more heart, one more voice, one more thread in the long weaving of God's plan. Abraham had trusted and obeyed. The servant had prayed and watched. Rebekah had answered, "I will go," without knowing where the road would lead. Jacob and Esau, says. The years in Beersheba were kind to Isaac and Rebekah, though they were not without their own quiet ache. For a long time, Rebekah remained without child, just as Sarah had been before her. Isaac did not rush to his own schemes. He had learned from his father's story, and so he went to the Lord with a simple prayer. He asked for what his heart truly wanted. The Lord heard him. Rebekah conceived, and the household began to stir with hope. But the pregnancy was not easy. The children inside her moved with such force that Rebekah felt a battle growing within her own body. She could not understand it. The struggle was constant, day and night, with no rest. In her weariness, she went to the Lord and asked a plain question. Why was this happening to her? What did it mean? The answer came to her in a way that was quiet but certain. 2 nations were in her womb. 2 peoples would come from her body, and they would be divided. One would be stronger than the other. The older would serve the younger. That was a strange thing to hear, for in those days the firstborn held the place of honor. But the Lord had spoken, and Rebekah carried that truth in her heart like a seed waiting for rain. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins. The first to come out was red all over, like a hairy garment. His skin was rough and covered with fine hair, and he came into the world with a cry that seemed to demand attention. They named him Esau, which meant hairy, and also carried the sound of the word for made, as if he was formed from the earth itself. Then his brother came out, and his hand was clutching Esau's heel. It was as if he were trying to hold on, to pull himself forward, to be first, even though he was second. They named him Jacob, which meant heel grabber or supplanter, one who follows closely and takes what was ahead. The boys grew, and they were nothing alike. Esau became a man of the field. He loved the open country, the chase, the sweat of a long hunt. He was skilled with the bow and the spear, and he brought home game that filled the family's table. His skin was tanned by the sun, and his laugh was loud and easy. He was his father's favorite, for Isaac loved the taste of wild meat. When Esau came back from a hunt with a fresh catch, Isaac's eyes would light up with a simple pleasure. It was a bond built on something as basic as hunger and satisfaction. Jacob was different. He was a quiet man, content to dwell in the tents. He did not chase after beasts or seek the thrill of the wild. He preferred the shade of the cloth, the slow work of tending the flocks, the careful business of daily life. His hands were smooth, his voice soft. He watched and he waited. He was his mother's favorite. For Rebekah saw something in him, a patience, a cleverness, a deep well of thought that Esau did not possess. She remembered the words the Lord had spoken to her before they were born. The older would serve the younger. She held that promise close, and she watched for the moment when it would come to pass. One day Esau came back from the field exhausted. It had been a long and fruitless hunt. He had run for miles, climbed hills, crossed streams, and found nothing. His stomach was empty, and his body was spent. He stumbled into the camp and smelled something warm and rich. Jacob was stirring a pot of lentil stew, a simple meal of red lentils boiled with herbs and a bit of oil. The color was deep and earthy, almost like the red dust of the land. Esau stopped. He looked at the pot. He could feel his hunger like a weight in his chest. He said to Jacob with a voice that was rough and tired, "Let me have some of that red stuff. I am famished." Jacob looked at his brother. He did not move quickly. He did not rush to fill a bowl. He looked at Esau and saw the moment for what it was. This was not just a hungry brother asking for food. This was a chance, a quiet door that had opened in the flow of ordinary time. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright today." The birthright was a real thing in those days. It was the double portion of the inheritance. It was the place of honor at the table. It was the blessing of the firstborn, the line of promise that carried the family forward. Esau was the elder. That right belonged to him by birth. But Jacob wanted it. He had always wanted it, not for greed alone, but because he believed the Lord had said that the older would serve the younger. He was not content to wait for fate. He wanted to shape it with his own hands. Esau laughed. He was too tired to think. He was too hungry to care about distant promises. He said, "Look, I am about to die. What good is a birthright to me now?" In his mind, the birthright was a thing for the future, for old men and long ceremonies. But the stew was here now, warm and real. Jacob pressed him. "Swear to me first." So Esau swore. He gave his birthright away with a word, a casual and careless exchange. He took the bread and the stew, and he ate until his hunger was gone. Then he got up and left, and the weight of what he had done did not trouble him at all. He did not see the value of what he had lost. He had traded something eternal for something temporary, and he walked away without a second thought. But Jacob remembered. He stored the moment in his heart like a treasure. The birthright was his now, by law and by oath. Yet there was more. There was still the blessing. Isaac was old, and his eyes were growing dim. He could not see well, and his body was failing. The time was coming when the father would speak the words that would shape the future of his sons. Esau had lost the birthright, but he still expected the blessing. He did not know that his brother had already taken the first step. The years passed, and Isaac grew weaker. His sight was almost gone, and he spent most of his days lying on his bed, waiting for the end. He called Esau to him one day, for he knew his time was near. He said, "My son." Esau came close. "Here I am." Isaac said, "I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Take your weapons, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field. Hunt some game for me. Prepare me a savory dish, the kind I love. Bring it to me, and I will eat so that my soul may bless you before I die." Esau was eager. He wanted his father's blessing more than anything. He had lost the birthright in a moment of weakness, but he believed the blessing would still be his. He grabbed his bow and left quickly, his mind already on the hunt. But Rebekah heard the words. She was listening, as she often was, and she understood what was happening. She knew that Esau was going to receive the blessing, and she knew that the blessing belonged to Jacob. She acted fast. She called Jacob and told him what she had heard. She said, "Now, my son, listen to me. Do what I say. Go to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats. I will prepare them as a savory dish for your father, just the way he loves it. Then you will take it to him, and he will eat, and he will bless you before he dies." Jacob hesitated. He was clever, but he was also afraid. He said, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man. I am smooth. My father will touch me and know that I am not Esau. He will see that I am deceiving him, and I will bring a curse upon myself instead of a blessing." Rebekah did not waver. She said, "Let the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I say. Go and bring the goats." So Jacob went. He brought the goats, and Rebekah prepared the dish with care. She took the skins of the goats and wrapped them around Jacob's arms and the smooth part of his neck. She dressed him in Esau's best clothes, the ones that smelled of the field and the animals. She gave him the bread and the stew, and she sent him to his father. Jacob entered the tent. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. He said, "My father." Isaac said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Sit up and eat of my game so that your soul may bless me." Isaac was puzzled. He said, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" Jacob said, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." Isaac was not fully convinced. He said, "Come near so I can feel you, my son. Let me know if you are really my son Esau or not." Jacob went near, and Isaac touched his hands. The skin was rough and hairy, like Esau's. Isaac said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He still was not sure, so he asked again, "Are you really my son Esau?" Jacob said, "I am." Isaac said, "Bring the food to me, and I will eat of my son's game so that my soul may bless you." Jacob brought the food, and Isaac ate. He drank wine, and he felt a warmth in his chest. Then he said, "Come near and kiss me, my son." Jacob came near and kissed him. Isaac smelled the clothes, the scent of the field cease, the rich, earthy smell of Esau. And then he believed. He spoke the blessing, the words that could not be taken back. He said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Jacob received the blessing, and he left the tent quietly. His heart was racing, but his face was calm. And then Esau came back. He had hunted, prepared the dish, and brought it with pride. He entered the tent and said, "Let my father sit up and eat of his son's game, so that your soul may bless me." Isaac trembled. He said, "Who are you?" Esau said, "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." Isaac began to shake. His voice was filled with dread. "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate before you came, and I blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed." Esau Esau heard the words, and a cry broke from him. It was a loud and bitter cry. He said, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." But Isaac said, "Your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing." Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing." He wept, and his tears were real. He asked, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Isaac answered, "I have made him lord over you, and I have given him all his brothers as servants. I have sustained him with grain and wine. What can I do for you now, my son?" Esau said, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Isaac was moved by his son's grief, and he spoke a lesser blessing. He said, "Your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from off your neck." Esau left the tent with a heaviness in his chest. He did not understand why things had gone so wrong. He had been careless, and he had been deceived. And in his heart, a seed of anger began to grow. He told himself that the days of mourning for his father were coming, and after that, he would deal with his brother. Jacob's journey. The night lay heavy over the land as Jacob slipped away from his father's tents. His mother Rebekah had urged him to go, her voice urgent with fear. Esau's anger burned like a fire ready to consume. Jacob carried only his staff and a small bundle of bread. The dust of Beersheba clung to his sandals as he turned his face toward Haran. The road wound north through the hills. Jacob walked alone, and the silence of the wilderness pressed in around him. He thought of the blessing he had taken from his brother. The words had felt sweet in his mouth, but now they tasted like stones. Each step carried him farther from everything he had known. The groves of his childhood gave way to open country, and the sun climbed higher, beating down on his shoulders. By evening, the land had changed. Rocky slopes rose on either side, and the path became rough beneath his feet. Jacob found a place where the ground leveled slightly, a hollow between 2 large stones. He had no pillow, so he took one of the stones and set it beneath his head. The hardness pressed against his temple, but exhaustion outweighed discomfort. He pulled his cloak tight and closed his eyes. The dream came without warning. A ladder stood upon the earth, its base planted firmly in the soil where Jacob lay. Its top reached into the heavens, rising beyond sight, beyond thought. Light moved along its rungs, and Jacob saw the messengers of God ascending and descending, their forms bright as morning. They climbed with purpose, their feet finding each step with ease, moving between the worlds of dust and glory. And above the ladder the Lord himself stood. Jacob heard a voice, deep as the sound of many waters, gentle as the first rain. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. In you and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. The voice paused, and Jacob felt its weight settle over him like a garment. Behold, I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. Jacob woke with a start. The stone still pressed against his head. The stars wheeled overhead, countless in their number, each one a point of light against the vast dark. He sat up slowly, his heart pounding. The dream lingered in his mind like the scent of rain on dry ground. Surely the Lord is in this place, he whispered, and I did not know it. Fear and wonder filled him in equal measure. He looked around at the rocky ground, the rough stones, the empty hills. This ordinary place, this forgotten patch of wilderness, had become a gate, the house of God, the door of heaven. When morning came, Jacob rose early. He took the stone that had served as his pillow and set it upright, a marker for what he had seen. He poured oil over it, the fragrant liquid running down its surface, anointing it as a sacred thing. He called the place Bethel, though its name had been Luz before. Then Jacob made a promise. If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I go, and give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. He spoke the words, but his voice carried the weight of bargaining. He was still Jacob, the one who grasped, the one who traded. He did not yet know that God's promises do not depend on our conditions. The ladder had shown the way between heaven and earth, but Jacob still had far to travel before he understood its meaning. The journey continued. Days merged into weeks as Jacob pressed eastward. The land of Canaan fell behind him, and the great wilderness opened before him, vast and empty. He crossed dry riverbeds and climbed rocky passes. He met no one on the road, and the solitude wrapped around him like a second skin. After many days, Jacob came to a well in the open country. 3 flocks of sheep lay beside it, their shepherds resting nearby. The stone covering the well's mouth was large and heavy, and Jacob saw that it would take many hands to roll it away. My brothers, he said, approaching the shepherds, where are you from? We are from Haran, they answered. Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? Jacob asked, hope rising in his chest. We know him, they replied. And look, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep. Jacob turned and saw her. She walked toward the well with a steady grace, her flock following behind her. The late afternoon light fell across her face, and Jacob felt something shift inside him, a recognition deeper than thought. This was the daughter of his mother's brother. This was the one his journey had been leading toward, though he had not known it until this moment. He moved to the well, and with strength he did not know he possessed, rolled the stone from its mouth. The shepherds watched in surprise. Jacob drew water for Rachel's sheep, the cool liquid filling the troughs while the animals pressed forward to drink. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. The tears came unbidden, the release of all the long miles, all the lonely nights, all the fear and hope that had traveled with him. I am your father's relative, he said, his voice breaking, the son of Rebekah. Rachel ran to tell her father, and Laban came out to meet Jacob. He embraced him, kissed him, and brought him into his house. Jacob had found his family. He had found a place to rest. After Jacob had stayed a month, Laban spoke to him. Because you are my relative, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older was Leah, and her eyes were weak. The younger was Rachel, and she was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel. The sight of her stirred something in him that he had never felt before, a longing that went deeper than words. "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel," Jacob said. Laban agreed, and the years began. They passed like days to Jacob, for the text tells us truly, they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. He worked in the fields, tended the flocks, learned the rhythms of a new land. The sun rose and set, the seasons turned, and Jacob's love for Rachel grew with each passing year. When the 7 years were complete, Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my time is fulfilled, that I may go in to her." Laban gathered all the men of the place and made a feast. The celebration lasted through the evening, with food and drink and music. But when the darkness had fully settled, Laban brought Leah to Jacob instead. The veil covered her face, and the night hid the deception. Jacob took her as his wife, and only when morning broke did he see the truth. The anger rose in him, hot and sharp. "What is this you have done to me?" he demanded. "Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" Laban's answer was smooth as oil. "It is not done so in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob had no choice. He had spent his life deceiving others, and now he tasted the bitter fruit of being deceived. The trickster had been tricked. The one who had taken his brother's blessing now found his own knights turned against him. The stone he had laid his head on in Bethel had not been the only hard place he would rest. He agreed. He served 7 more years, and in the unfolding of those years, Jacob's family grew. Leah bore him sons, one after another, each birth carrying its own weight of hope and sorrow. Rachel remained barren, her grief a quiet ache that Jacob could not heal. The days were long, the labor constant. Jacob learned the ways of this new land, the patience of shepherding, the slow accumulation of flocks and herds. He became a man of substance, though his heart remained divided between two sisters, between duty and desire. The years stretched on, 14 years of service and then more, as Jacob made his way in Laban's household. The journey that had begun with a stone for a pillow had become a season of waiting, of learning, of becoming someone new. The ladder still stood in his memory, its top reaching into heaven. But Jacob had not yet climbed it. He was still at the bottom, his feet planted in the earth, looking up. Jacob's return. The long road home stretched before Jacob, and each step carried the weight of 20 years. He had left this land a fleeing man, a trickster running from his brother's anger. Now he returned with wives and children, with flocks and servants, with gifts meant to soften a brother's heart. But the old fear had not left him. It traveled with him, a silent companion on every mile. Word reached him that Esau was coming to meet him, and with Esau came 400 men. The number moved through Jacob's thoughts like a chill wind through dry grass. He divided his household into two camps, thinking that if one was struck, the other might escape. Then he did the only thing he knew to do. He prayed. Not the clever prayers of a bargainer, but the desperate prayer of a man who had run out of options. He sent gifts ahead. Herds of goats and sheep, camels and cattle, each drove separated from the next. His message to Esau was simple. "These belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau." Between each drove, he left space, room for his brother's anger to cool, room for the gifts to speak before words had to. That night, Jacob stayed alone by the river Jabbok. His family had crossed, his servants had crossed, his flocks had crossed. Everything he owned stood on the other side, waiting for him. But something held him back. Some knowledge that the man who had left this land 20 years ago was not the man who should return to it. The night was quiet. The river moved past him, patient and constant. And then, out of the darkness, a figure came to meet him. They wrestled. There is no other way to tell it. They took hold of each other in the mud of the riverbank, and they fought. Not the clean fighting of matched opponents, but the desperate clinging of two who would not let go. The stranger was strong, stronger than any man Jacob had ever faced. But Jacob held on. Through the cold hours, through the ache in his muscles, through the burning in his lungs, he held on. The stranger struck him on the hip. The blow was not heavy, but it carried a weight beyond strength. Jacob's joint slipped out of place, and pain shot through him like fire through dry wood. Still, he would not let go. He could not let go. Something in him knew that this was the moment everything changed, that if he released his grip, he would release himself. "Let me go," the stranger said. "The dawn is coming." But Jacob held tighter. "I will not let you go until you bless me." The stranger looked at him, and in that look Jacob saw depths he could not name. "What is your name?" "Jacob," he said, and the words sounded strange to him, as if he were speaking of someone else, someone he used to be. "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the stranger said. "It will be Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and you have overcome." The words settled into Jacob like stones into still water. Israel. He who struggles with God, he had fought with God that night, and he had held on. He had refused to let go until he received a blessing. And he had received one. Not the blessing of a father, stolen by cunning, but a blessing earned in the dark, through pain and persistence. "Please," Jacob said, "tell me your name." The stranger did not give his name, but he blessed Jacob there in the shadow of the coming dawn. And as the first light touched the horizon, he was gone. Jacob stood alone by the river. His hip was out of joint. He could not walk without a limp, but something had changed in him. He looked down at his hands, still trembling from the struggle, and he knew that he was no longer the man who had crossed this river with nothing but a staff. He called the place Peniel. "For I have seen God face to face," he said, "and my life has been preserved." The sun rose over the river, and Jacob began to walk. He limped, but he walked. Each step was a reminder of the night's struggle. Each step was a proof that he had survived, that he had been changed. As he came to the far bank, he saw the dust of approaching riders. Esau's men, 400 of them, and at their head, his brother. Jacob had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind. He had planned what he would say, how he would bow, what gifts he would present. But all his planning seemed thin now, like morning mist over the river. He did the only thing he could do. He went forward. He bowed low. Not the careful bow of a diplomat, but the full prostration of a man who had nothing left to prove. He bowed 7 times, each one bringing him closer to the brother he had wronged, each one a confession of the distance between them. And then Esau ran to him. The years fell away. The stolen birthright, the stolen blessing, the 20 years of separation, all of it dissolved in the embrace of 2 brothers who had shared a womb. Esau wept. Jacob wept. The 400 men stood at a distance and watched, and perhaps they understood something about the weight of family, about the strange mercy of reunion. Esau looked at Jacob's face, and Jacob saw no anger there, no bitterness, only the weariness of a man who had also carried his own burdens, who had also made his own peace with the past. "Who are these with you?" Esau asked, nodding toward the women and children who waited at a distance. "They are the children God has graciously given your servant," Jacob said. The children came forward. Leah and Rachel brought them one by one, and each one bowed before Esau. The maidservants and their children came too, and Esau looked at them all, this great company of family that his brother had gathered, and his eyes softened. "What do you mean by all this company I met?" Esau asked. "Why did you send all these gifts ahead of me?" "To find favor in the sight of my Lord," Jacob said. But Esau shook his head. "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have." Jacob insisted. "No, please. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept this present from my hand. For I have seen your face, and it is like seeing the face of God. You have received me with such grace." And Esau accepted the gifts. They talked then, the 2 brothers, under the open sky. They spoke of the years that had passed, of the people they had become, of the road that had brought them to this moment. Esau offered to travel with Jacob, to walk beside him on the journey home. But Jacob demurred gently, knowing that their paths would part again. Some reconciliations do not require constant presence. Some healings need space to breathe, so they parted, not with anger, not with fear, but with peace. Esau returned to Seir with his 400 men. Jacob traveled on towards Sukkoth, where he built a house for his family and shelters for his livestock. He was still limping from the night at Peniel. He would always limp, but the limp was not a mark of shame. It was a reminder, a memory made visible in his walking. He had struggled with God, and he had held on. He had seen his brother's face, and it had been like seeing the face of God. He had been Jacob, the trickster, the one who grasped at what was not his. And now he was Israel, the one who struggled, the one who overcame. The road ahead stretched long and uncertain. His daughter Dinah would face trouble in the land of Shechem. His sons would make choices that would bring grief to his old age. But all of that was still to come. For now, there was only this moment, this peace, this reconciliation. The man who had fled with nothing returned with everything, not because he had taken it, but because he had received it, not because he had grasped, but because he had held on. And somewhere, in the quiet places of his heart, Jacob knew that the blessing he had wrestled from the stranger by the river was worth every step of the long road home. Joseph and his brothers Jacob, now called Israel, grew old in the land of Canaan. His sons had become men, each with their own place in the family. But among them all, one son held a special place in the old father's heart. Joseph, the firstborn of Rachel, the wife Jacob had loved most, was the child of his old age. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. He made the boy a long robe with sleeves, a garment of many colors that set him apart from his brothers who worked in the fields. The brothers saw this favor and felt the sting of it. They could not speak a kind word to Joseph, for their hearts had grown hard toward him. Then Joseph began to dream. One night he dreamed that he and his brothers were binding sheaves in the field. His sheaf rose and stood upright, and the sheaves of his brothers gathered around and bowed down to his sheaf. When he told his brothers this dream, their anger grew. "Will you indeed reign over us?" they asked. "Will you rule over us?" They hated him all the more for his dream and for his words. But Joseph dreamed again. In this second dream, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to him. He told his father and his brothers, and even Israel rebuked him. "What is this dream that you have dreamed?" His father asked. "Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" Yet Israel kept the matter in his heart, wondering what it might mean. His brothers, however, did not wonder. They only grew more bitter. The time came when Joseph's brothers took the flocks to graze near Shechem. Joseph was 17 years old, a young man tending the sheep with his brothers. After many days, Israel called to Joseph, "Your brothers are pasturing the sheep near Shechem. Go to them and see if all is well with them and with the flocks, and bring me word." So Joseph set out alone. He came to Shechem, but his brothers had moved on. A man found him wandering in the field and asked what he sought. "I am looking for my brothers," Joseph said. "Tell me, where are they pasturing the flock?" The man told him they had gone to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. The brothers saw him from a distance. Before he reached them, they plotted against him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to one another. "Come now, let us unlive him and throw him into one of the pits. We will say that a fierce animal has devoured him. Then we will see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben, the eldest, heard their plan and wanted to save Joseph. "Let us not take his life," he said. "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Reuben planned to come back later and rescue Joseph to return him safely to their father. So when Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that their father had made for him. They took him and threw him into an empty pit, one that had no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. As they ate, they looked up and saw a caravan coming from Gilead. Their camels carried gum, balm, and myrrh on their way down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we unlive our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers agreed. When the Midianite traders passed by, they pulled Joseph up from the pit and sold him for 20 shekels of silver. The traders took Joseph to Egypt. Reuben returned to the pit, and Joseph was not there. He tore his clothes in grief and went back to his brothers. "The boy is gone," he said, "and I, where shall I go?" The brothers took Joseph's robe and dipped it in goat's blood. They brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please examine it. Is it your son's robe or not?" Israel recognized it at once. "It is my son's robe," he said. "A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." He tore his garments, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused. "No," he said, "I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." So his father wept for him. And in Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. The Lord was with Joseph in Egypt. He became a successful man in the house of his master. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed. So Joseph found favor in Potiphar's eyes, and he was put in charge of the entire household. The Lord blessed the house of the Egyptian for Joseph's sake, and the blessing was on all that Potiphar had, in the house and in the field. Potiphar left everything in Joseph's charge, and he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. After some time, his master's wife cast her eyes on him and said, "Lie with me." But Joseph refused. "My master has put everything in my charge," he said. "He has kept back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" He spoke to her day after day, but she would not listen. She kept pressing him. One day Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there. She caught him by his garment and said, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled from the house. When she saw that he had left his garment with her, she called to the men of her household and said, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. When he heard me lift up my voice, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." She kept his garment until her husband came home, and she told him the same story. When Potiphar heard his wife's words, his anger burned. He took Joseph and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Joseph was about 28 years old at this time, having served in Potiphar's house for nearly 11 years. But even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. He showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The keeper put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners in the place. Whatever was done there, Joseph was the one who did it. The keeper paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with Joseph, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. 2 full years passed in prison. Joseph was now about 30 years old. Then Pharaoh himself had dreams. In his dream, he stood by the Nile, and 7 cows came up from the river, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the reeds. Then 7 other cows came up after them, ugly and thin, and they ate the sleek, fat cows. Pharaoh woke. He slept again and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed the plump ears. Pharaoh woke, and his spirit was troubled. He sent for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. He told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke. He remembered Joseph. "I remember my offenses today," he said. "When Pharaoh was angry with his servants, he put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed dreams the same night, and a young Hebrew, a servant of the captain of the guard, interpreted them for us. It turned out exactly as he interpreted. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph. They brought him hastily out of the dungeon. He shaved himself and changed his clothes and came in before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, "I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph answered, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Joseph listened as Pharaoh told him the dreams. Then he spoke. "The dream of Pharaoh is one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The 7 thin and ugly cows are 7 years of famine, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will not be remembered. Now let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let him collect all the food of these good years and store up grain. That food shall be a reserve for the 7 years of famine, so that the land will not perish." The plan pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. "Can we find a man like this?" Pharaoh said. "In whom is the Spirit of God?" He said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall obey your word. Only as to the throne will I be greater than you." He took a signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. He clothed him in fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. He made him ride in the second chariot, for him bow the knee. Thus Joseph ruled over all the land of Egypt. The 7 years of plenty came. Joseph gathered food as the sand of the sea until he stopped counting, for it was beyond measure. Then the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. The famine was over all the land, but in Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said, "Go to Joseph, do whatever he says." The famine spread over all the earth, and in Canaan, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy grain for us, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's full brother, for he said, "Lest harm should happen to him." The brothers came before Joseph, the governor of the land, and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but they did not recognize him. He remembered his dreams, the dreams of the sheaves and the stars, and he spoke roughly to them, testing them to see if their hearts had changed. Through a long and careful test, Joseph learned that his brothers had changed. Judah offered himself in place of Benjamin. He spoke of their father's grief and how the boy's loss would bring the old man down to Sheol in sorrow. When Joseph heard this, he could no longer contain himself. He cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." No one else was present when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it. He said, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Joseph said, "Come near to me, please." They came near, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God." He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked with him. The news reached Pharaoh's house. Pharaoh was pleased, and he sent wagons and provisions for the family of Joseph. The brothers returned to Canaan and told their father, "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart grew faint, for he did not believe them. But when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent, the spirit of their father revived. "It is enough," Israel said. "Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." So Joseph's family came down to Egypt, 70 souls in all. Joseph went up to meet his father in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen your face, for you are still alive." And Israel dwelt in the land of Goshen. The famine continued, but Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread down to the little ones. The dreams had come to pass. The brothers had bowed down, and through their brothers' suffering, a family was saved. What they had meant for harm, God had meant for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive.